Chapter 169. I agree with Raphael, Leger said. These guys must have been following us, but what do they want to do? The eyes of Han Jin and the others all fell on Yelena's magic wand at the same time. It was too eye-catching. An ordinary mercenary team might not be able to afford such a wand even if they worked hard for a lifetime. It was understandable that they would be tempted by it. No. Leger shook his head slightly. I don't think it has anything to do with Yelena. Even holy animals know not to attack dangerous prey, let alone mercenaries, Leger said slowly. If they robbed others when they saw something good, would isolated Cliff City still exist? Those mercenaries would have killed each other and died long ago. Then why do you think they are following us? I don't know. I only know that it's not that simple. Don't say so much. Morrison's kicked the unconscious thief. Just ask him. Leger, Morrison's, take him into the forest. Don't scare them, Han Jin said softly. Us? We'll be fine, Asa hurriedly said. Really? Morrison's laughed. Then you guys follow me, Morrison's said as he dragged the thief from the ground. Asa and his companions looked at each other and followed Morrison's. Morrison's, this guy. Sasu smiled bitterly. He didn't like bloody scenes, and Asa and the others probably didn't like it either. But they had followed them willingly, so they couldn't blame anyone. It didn't take long for a blood-curdling scream to be heard from the forest. The rest of the young magicians were all scared out of their wits, but Han Jin and the others were still acting as if nothing had happened. They had all participated in wars, and this was nothing compared to the slaughter on the battlefield. Intermittent screams resounded through the forest. Han Jin, Sunir, and Cessation were talking in a low voice. About half an hour later, the screams stopped abruptly. Asa and the others staggered out. Judging from their pale and frightened faces, it seemed that they had also been tortured. Morrison's and Leger followed behind Asa and the others. Their faces were also pale. Where is he? Han Jin was stunned. Ask him, Leger said. Han Jin's eyes fell on Morrison's. Morrison scratched his head and smiled. I was careless. He's dead? Yes, he committed suicide. Next time, don't join in the fun when I'm doing something. Leger was still angry. Torture is torture, not for you to vent your anger or scare people. Do you think I wanted to go? Raphael asked me to help you. Morrison's knew that he was in the wrong, so he could only use Han Jin to pressure him. I don't need your help. The more you help, the more chaotic it will be. You didn't get anything out of him? Han Jin asked. Yes. If you didn't get anything out of him, then forget it. Han Jin stood up. Everyone needs to rest early today. Who's on night duty? Sasu asked. Me, Han Jin said. I'll be on night duty with you, Sunir said. No, you should rest early too. Han Jin paused. Maybe tomorrow. You won't have time to rest even if you want to. As the saying goes, birds of a feather flock together. If the thief in charge of watching them was an idiot, then Han Jin wouldn't care. However, the thief wasn't weak, and he was very stubborn. Now that he refused to submit, his companions would be hard to deal with as well. Han Jin's words were no different from an order to some extent. Everyone got busy. While they were setting up the temporary camp, Han Jin first searched the dead thief's body for a while, but he didn't find anything. Then he went to the nearby forest and walked around. When he came back, everyone had already finished dinner. Morrison's, Sasu, and the others were talking and laughing as if they didn't care about what happened just now. Influenced by them, the young magicians calmed down. Only Asa and a few others still looked pale. You didn't eat? Han Jin asked Asa. I don't want to eat. Raphael, don't force them. Morrison's University said casually. Just now, Yelena forced them to eat. They ate a few mouthfuls and then ran over there to vomit. Isn't it because of you? You deliberately scared them. Look at how scared they are. Leger said. Am I scaring them? I'm telling them the truth about this world. Morrison's patted Ace's shoulder. Boy, remember, don't fall into the enemy's hands, even if you die. Otherwise, you saw that guy just now, right? Ace's face turned pale. He stared at Morrison's as if he was looking at a devil. His lips moved, but he couldn't say a word. Asa, what's wrong? A female deacon asked with concern. And you women, remember this, Morrison's said excitedly. Especially on the battlefield. Even if you are nobles, it can't protect you. The enemy. Morrison's. Sunier shouted. Forget it, I won't talk about it. Morrison shrugged and obediently shut his mouth. Then, aren't you afraid? Asa asked with a trembling voice. Afraid of what? Death? Morrison's laughed loudly. Boy, since you've embarked on this path, you must be prepared to fail. Fear won't solve problems. If you're afraid of this and that, you'll never become a strong person. You're not prepared. Leger couldn't stand it anymore. I wonder who's pestering Raphael like a shameless dog asking for a substitute puppet. Yes, Morrison's. Since you've come to this realization, don't compete with us in the future. Sasu laughed. Substitute puppet? Yelena asked in surprise. Ah yes. Leger was stunned. Raphael, can you release a substitute puppet for me? I'm very curious. Yelena's gaze fell on Han Jin. Yelena, you can release lightning forbidden spells, right? Sasu asked. Yes. Yelena nodded. I've never seen a forbidden spell before. Can you show us? Sasu smiled. The principle is the same, sure. Yelena said seriously. Do you want to see it now? Sasu choked on his words. He realized that he had just made a very stupid analogy. Stop joking, Morrison's hurriedly said. Raphael will not only exhaust all his magic power to release a substitute puppet, but it will also damage his body. How can he release a substitute puppet so casually? Is that so? Yelena said with some regret. Maybe in the future. There will be a chance in the future, Han Jin said softly. In this temporary team, Han Jin was probably the most trusted person. He said that he would be on duty tonight, so everyone was at ease. After dinner, everyone split up and practiced for a while before going to bed early. Before Yelena released the magic shield, Han Jin had already left the group and quietly hid in the bushes. There was one thing he didn't tell them. The young magicians had just calmed down, so it would be useless to tell them. As for Sunier and the others, they wouldn't be able to help him for the time being. Besides, many things might happen tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Instead of letting them accompany him for the whole night, it would be better to let them rest and maintain their full strength. When he was searching in the forest just now, he had a feeling that he was being spied on. Now that he had mastered the art of alchemy, his perception had become very sharp. When walking in a crowd, this feeling would be covered up. If there were people in front and behind him, he would think that they were watching him. However, when he was alone in the forest, the feeling of being spied on was particularly clear. Another troublesome thief. He had already killed one, but there was still another one. Maybe they belonged to the same mercenary team, or maybe they didn't know each other. If it was the latter, then the problem became even more confusing. Why were they all following him? As the night grew darker, a few talismans quietly floated down and fell into the bushes, turning into black smoke. More than 20 ghosts appeared out of thin air, their bodies close to the ground as they moved silently. Han Jin stretched out his hand, and dozens of little insects appeared in his palm. He then scattered them. Invisibility didn't mean that he would completely disappear. As long as the thief was moving, he would definitely rub the bushes and branches, and then he would immediately detect his position. In fact, these were all useless Taoist magic arts. Han Jin had many better methods, such as using the third eye to see and using the third ear to listen. Unfortunately, even though he had mastered the art of alchemy, he was still far from being able to use divine sense. With his current state, he could only use this stupid method. After a while, the ghosts and the wooden insects on the ground had spread out and moved silently within 100 meters of Han Jin. Han Jin took out a long sword from his space ring. It was Harry's sword. When Harry was attacked by Han Jin's 3 true fire that day, he threw the sword to the ground. Scott thought that Han Jin was a dragon slayer, so he was too scared to care about anything else. It was already good enough that he remembered to take Harry away. This sword became Han Jin's trophy. As a 9th-level swordsman, Harry certainly wouldn't use an ordinary sword. At that time, Morrison's took it and played with it for a long time, which was enough to prove the quality of this sword. Unfortunately, Morrison's was more reluctant to part with his old friend, and thought that this sword was too light. Finally, he returned the sword to Han Jin. Han Jin's finger slowly moved on the sword edge. Countless light spots fell down like flying sand and disappeared into the sword edge. Although he was qualified to use a flying sword, he still needed the help of charms and charms, but he couldn't use it for long. However, it was much easier now than before. At least he didn't have to worry about the loss of energy. The life fire transformed from the dragon blood forcibly opened up his middle meridian and condensed into abundant vital energy. It was not pure vital core, nor was it pure energy. In his master's words, this was the true beginning. Chapter 170. Chipango looked at the figure in the distance quietly. After a moment of hesitation, he slowly moved forward, trying not to make any sound. He was a real mixed-race child who grew up with his mother. He didn't know who his father was, but he knew that his mother was not human. A long time ago, his mother had followed the Medusa tribe to the surface to participate in the war. Unfortunately, she had become a captive. Because of her rare beauty, his mother had escaped the fate of being tortured and killed. Unfortunately, she could not escape another fate, which was rape. In his memory, there would be many men pouncing on his mother's bed every day. Day after day, year after year, all kinds of men would change, but the process was always the same, until his mother was strangled to death by a few noblemen who were looking for excitement. No matter how miserable her fate was, as an intelligent being, there would always be something unforgettable. His mother was the same. Gerald, this was a horrible name. But every time his mother mentioned this name, her face would become unusually gentle, because it was Gerald who took away his mother's chastity. Although Gerald would never show mercy to a woman, and that night might have brought unforgettable pain to his mother had long regarded Gerald as her husband, and often told him that he was Gerald's child. When the guests were violent, his mother would imagine that it was Gerald's violence. When the guests were gentle, his mother would imagine that it was Gerald's gentleness. At first, he didn't understand why his mother deliberately lived in an illusion. But later, he understood that she couldn't live without it. Even if she raised him wholeheartedly, she still couldn't live. He hated that man, especially after his mother was strangled to death. But he also knew that if he continued to stay in the Holy Crown City, he, as a descendant of the Abyss race, would be tortured to death sooner or later. So he took out the money that his mother had secretly saved and left the Holy Crown City. In the end, a thief became his teacher and took him to the isolated Cliff City. When he first came to the Terrashaw Mountains to train, he was ready to die. But things were always so strange. Those who didn't want to die fell in front of him one by one. But he, who wanted to die, experienced one bloody battle after another, miraculously survived, and became stronger and stronger. From his mother, he inherited the special skill of the Medusas, the night vision eye. The night vision eye was actually not very useful, but combined with the profession of a thief, it became a very useful skill. No matter where it was, as long as it was covered by the night, it would become Chipango's kingdom. He could easily find all the enemies, even thieves who used the invisibility spell. Everything that had the characteristics of life turned into bright red shadows in his field of vision. He could see everything at a glance. Just like the enemy hiding in the tree, Chipango sneered inwardly. Did he think he wouldn't be discovered by hiding in that place? Idiot. While Chipango was sneering, Han Jin was sneering as well. The thief had just walked over while stepping on ghosts, and there were two strange-looking insects hanging on his back. Did he want to fight? Interesting. Finally, Chipango approached the tree and slowly looked up. The red shadow was still sitting there. Han Jin calmly adjusted his breath. He was waiting for the other party to make a choice. If the other party just came to observe, he wouldn't attack. Instead, he would quietly follow the other party and find the whole mercenary team. Once and for all, the best plan would be to get rid of the trouble. If the other party didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, then he would have no other choice but to capture him alive. After a while, Chipango quietly climbed up the tree. His movements were very careful and slow, almost inch by inch. It was obvious that he was a very patient person. Unfortunately, he couldn't see the two insects floating in the air and moving with his body. Han Jin helplessly stretched. At this moment, a very weak scream came from afar. Chipango's body suddenly stiffened. Although the scream was even weaker than the sound of insects, he could tell that it was his companion's scream. Attack? Go back? Chipango quickly made his choice. He quietly slid down the tree again. After about 20 meters, he couldn't control his emotions anymore. His body appeared out of thin air and quickly slithered through the forest like a snake. Soon, he rushed back to the temporary camp of his companions. A scene that would make one's eyes pop out appeared in front of him. All of his companions, including the generous captain, were lying in a pool of blood. The blood flowing out of 7 or 8 people had already gathered into a blood fountain. On a rock next to him sat a red shadow. Actually, the night vision eye had its disadvantages. He couldn't tell who was who, and he couldn't tell if the other party was deliberately hiding themselves. For example, if the other party was a rogue, he couldn't tell if the other party was using invisibility. However, he usually hid his weakness very well, so no one noticed. Chipango could only pretend that the other party didn't exist. He bent down and carefully examined the injuries of his companions. He suddenly realized that all the wounds were exactly the same. Their necks were cut open and some were almost cut off. This made his hair stand on end. A rogue. A thief with unimaginable strength. You don't know how to be polite, the red shadow said indifferently. The red figure sitting on the rock said indifferently, seeing that I'm sitting here, shouldn't you at least greet me? Are you blind? Chipango finally confirmed that the other party didn't use invisibility. However, this arrogant attitude made his heart even colder. He forced himself to control his emotions and said in a low voice, "Sir, don't you think you're too cruel? You can't blame me. They didn't listen to my advice." The red shadow jumped down from the rock. "Now, it's your turn to make a choice." "Me?" Chipango hurriedly took a few steps back. He knew very well that the other party was an extremely dangerous person. He had to keep a certain distance. "We'll accept this mission," the red shadow said slowly. "Are you willing to give up or stay and cause trouble for us?" "Do I have any other choice now?" Chipango replied in a cold voice. "My companions were all killed by you. What can I do by myself?" "Your companions deserve to die," the red shadow said in a sarcastic tone. The red shadow said in a mocking tone, "The mission target is a grand mage. Do you think you can deal with an 11th order powerhouse with your own strength? Other than alerting the target, what else can you do?" The person who issued the mission made it very clear. "The Magus is very young and has almost no experience surviving in the forest. If you hadn't appeared, we might have had a chance," Chipango said hatefully. "So, you're going to cause trouble for us?" The red shadow's tone turned cold. Chipango took a deep breath and took out a magic scroll. He threw it out. It was an illumination spell. Only this spell could temporarily disable his night vision. A thin face with an incomparably cold gaze appeared. Chipango's eyes suddenly widened. Although the other party didn't move, He couldn't help but take 2 steps back. With a trembling voice, he said, "Gibran, it's you. Haha, you just recognized me?" Chipango almost instinctively used invisibility. Although he controlled his emotions in time to avoid any misunderstandings, he still looked around as if he was looking for someone. "No need to look," Gibran said calmly. "Because of some special reasons, Edwina didn't come. Otherwise, do you think you'd still be alive? So that's why you're talking nonsense with me, right?" Chipango showed a bitter smile. Before he recognized the other party, he was still secretly speculating about the other party's background. Now that he recognized the other party, he had completely given up. The gap between them was too big. The person he wanted to kill the most was Gerald. It was Gerald who caused his mother's miserable fate. With Gerald's status, he could have protected a prisoner of war. However, Gerald didn't do anything. He didn't return to the Holy Crown City because he knew the gap between him and Gerald. It was the same now. The gap between him and Gerald was the same as the gap between him and Gibran. He might be able to escape from Gibran, but it was impossible for him to avenge his companions. "It's not nonsense. I know you have a skill similar to the Eye of Truth. So, I'm willing to talk to you." Gibran said softly, "How about it? Have you made your decision?" Chipango didn't say anything. He understood the other party's meaning. He had the ability similar to the Eye of Truth, which made Gibran, who was also a thief, feel troubled. That was why Gibran was willing to talk to him. Otherwise, with Gibran's strength and character, he wouldn't have wasted his breath. After a long silence, Chipango finally opened his mouth. "They're all my companions. After I bury them, I'll leave. Don't worry." He chose to compromise. A long time ago, he picked up a stick and beat up a customer who deliberately tortured his mother. As a result, his mother suffered even more, and he was almost beaten to death. Since then, he had understood that there were many times when he had to compromise, even if it was temporary. "Don't let me down." Gibran's tone softened a little. He then turned and walked into the forest. When Gibran's figure completely disappeared, Chipango finally relaxed. Looking at his companions who used to be alive and kicking had turned into corpses, although he no longer cared about the joys and sorrows of life because of his miserable experience when he was young, the scene in front of him still touched him greatly. One life after another disappeared in the blink of an eye. It was them today, but who would it be tomorrow? Chipango's reddish eyes became moist as he knelt on the ground with a thud. At this moment, a figure strangely rose from behind him and chopped at Chipango's neck with a palm. The other party's timing was too insidious. Chipango had already lost his mind. When he realized something was wrong, he only felt darkness in front of his eyes and fainted on the ground. "So, do you know who issued this black mission?" Han Jin asked calmly. "There hasn't been a black mission in isolated Cliff City for a long time, so we were very curious and secretly investigated. Later, we found out that this mission was issued by..." Chipango hesitated. "Lord Forza of Fado City." Upon hearing this name, Yelena suddenly clenched the magic staff in her hand. Just like Zagund and Dismark, the hatred between her family and Forza was also irreconcilable. Even old enemies was not enough to describe their relationship. They were mortal enemies. An enemy that would not rest until one of them was dead. A hatred that would not rest until one of them was dead. Han Jin and the others looked at each other, feeling inexplicably surprised. How dare the Mercenary Association challenge Forza's authority? Chipango said in a sarcastic tone. For the Chambers of Commerce in isolated Cliff City, if they offend Forza, their caravans will no longer be able to pass through Fado City, and their businesses there will also suffer a heavy blow. What are the rules? It's just a bitch. As long as you have enough strength, you can force her to make all kinds of poses to cater to you. As for Forza's power, I don't think you have any doubts, right? Damn it. Moxink let out a long sigh. He felt very depressed. My lords, you have to be careful. I'm not the first to accept this mission, nor will I be the last. In order to avoid being misunderstood as gloating, Chipango put away his smile and said with a serious face, as far as I know, many mercenary groups and teams have already accepted this mission. My lords, you have many enemies. Chipango wanted to tell Gibran about the bandit, but after thinking about it, he decided to keep it a secret. He didn't think that these nameless mercenaries could survive the waves of attack. If Gibran found out about this, he would end up in a miserable state. An unrestricted mission? Morrison's face changed greatly. Yes. How much reward will you get after completing the mission? Han Jin asked softly. Reward? How can the value of a noble magus be measured by gold coins? Chipango shook his head with a bitter smile. Lord Forza paid 3 dragon crystals. Han Jin and the others were stunned. They had received a dragon crystal, which led to all kinds of ideas about the future. 1 dragon crystal could be exchanged for too many things. They didn't expect that Lord Forza would pay 3 dragon crystals in order to get rid of Yelena. What were they going to face? They were like a tide of mercenaries surging in. 1 dragon crystal was enough to make people disregard their own safety, let alone 3 dragon crystals. I finally understand why this place suddenly became so lively. Han Jin let out a long sigh. Lord Forza's intention is very vicious, really. Vicious? Raphael, what do you mean? Morrison's asked. Aggro can be accumulated. Think about it, if we kill a lot of mercenaries who attack us, what will happen? The more people we kill, the deeper the hatred between us and the mercenaries. Leger said slowly. Some mercenary groups who are not interested in black missions will also join the ranks of the mercenaries. We may even become public enemies. Damn it, can't you be reasonable? Morrison's jumped up. Are we just going to wait to be killed? Reasonable? Leger sneered. If we saw this mission in isolated Cliff City, would we accept it? There are no restrictions anyway. I remember that when we first hired you, you were to lead us to the Hydra's nest, right? Yelena suddenly said. Han Jin raised his head and looked at Yelena quietly, waiting for her to continue. Now that we have killed the Hydra and taken its tooth as a token, we have nothing to do with each other. Yelena looked back at Asa. Sign the contract and give it to them. Asa was stunned. After witnessing that battle, Han Jin had left an indelible impression in his heart. During this time, he was very happy and at ease. It was not so much because Yelena was protecting them, but because he could see Han Jin. He could not imagine what would happen if Han Jin left them. What are you waiting for? Give them the contract. Yelena shouted angrily. Asa took out the contract with trembling hands and signed it. Then he walked to Han Jin and handed the contract to Han Jin. Han Jin took the contract and looked at it carefully with a faint smile on his face. So, friends. Yelena's eyes became moist, and the long-lost coldness condensed on her face again. However, her tone was very unstable, as if it was filled with too many emotions. Goodbye. Yelena's eyes swept across Morrison's, Sunir, Leger, and Cecil. Finally, her gaze fell on Han Jin. She stared deeply at Han Jin, then turned and walked into the forest. Raphael. Morrison's was a little anxious. Han Jin did not say a word. He just stared at Yelena's back in a daze. After more than a year of rough experiences, Han Jin's prestige was unshakable. If he did not say anything, Leger and the others could only remain silent. Even an impatient person like Morrison's could only remind Han Jin. He would never ask Yelena to stay. This was a matter of principle. When Yelena passed by Asa and the others, she paused and said softly, "You guys stay here. Don't follow me." Asa clenched his teeth and stubbornly stood beside Yelena. With Asa as an example, the other young magicians also gathered around. No one backed down. Perhaps taking this step would lead to death, but taking a step back would allow them to drag out an ignoble existence. However, even the most humble life had its own perseverance and beliefs. Some of them had suggested using the space scroll to escape when Han Jin was fighting with the enemy. However, that was because Han Jin was just an outsider, a mercenary hired by them. Abandoning their mentor was a different matter. They could not do it no matter what. Yelena let out a soft sigh and once again walked slowly into the forest. If you leave us, you won't have a chance to live. Han Jin finally spoke. This guy's Light of the Dark Knight mercenary team has been killed. Do you know what this means? A very powerful mercenary group has also accepted the Black Mission. Raphael, you've overestimated yourself and underestimated me. Yelena turned around, her cold and arrogant demeanor once again returning to her usual cold and arrogant demeanor. Yelena, I didn't mean to slander you. I'm sorry if my wording made you uncomfortable. Han Jin smiled. I meant that you need some time to gradually grow. Before that, please accept my help. Don't worry, I won't ask for a reward. You mean, you want to protect me? Yelena asked coldly. Why? Although her face was cold, her heart was in turmoil. Background, status, beauty, and strength, as long as one had any one of these advantages, they would become the center of attention. However, Yelena had all of them. In the capital of elements, there were even people who used the word perfect to describe Yelena, and the number of young men who pursued her was uncountable. However, no one had ever said to Yelena, I want to protect you. Protect a magus? What kind of joke was this? Even the most shameless person had a bottom line. How could they say such shameless words? However, for a girl who had just fallen in love, 10,000 flowers and 10,000 words of praise were far less valuable than a single promise. I want to protect you. In the past, Yelena had hidden herself under a cold mask. Talent was just talent. Her inner world was like that of an ordinary girl. She had her own fantasies and visions. She had also sketched out a handsome, strong, gentle Prince Charming who would not be afraid of any challenge for her. No reason. Han Jin's smile gave people a feeling of elegance. Well, let's get ready. We have to continue our journey. Yelena gently bit her lips. No matter how Han Jin answered, she would continue to question him. However, Han Jin's no reason made her speechless. Her chest was a little stuffy, and something hot was boiling inside. Asa and the others couldn't help but look happy. Han Jin's, everyone, obviously included them. Moreover, judging from Yelena's expression, she didn't seem to want to insist on leaving. As a captive, Chipango had forgotten that he was a captive. He almost couldn't believe his ears. Were these unknown mercenaries crazy? They wanted to protect a magus? And they said it so matter-of-factly. Raphael, what should we do with this guy? Morrison's kicked Chipango. Han Jin's gaze fell on Chipango. Morrison said, although this guy has been very cooperative, he has seen our situation and even knows who our leader is. Should we still let him go? Sir, I'm willing to go with you. The corner of Chipango's eye twitched. I rarely return to isolated Cliff City. I spend most of the year wandering in the forest. I know this forest very well. Sir, there must be something I can help with. Let's take him with us, Han Jin said in a low voice. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Chipango showed a grateful expression. Leger quietly came over. When Morrisons took Chipango away, and there was no one around, he lowered his voice and asked, Raphael, why? Why what? Han Jin smiled. You know, why should we help Yelena? Leger hesitated. I think her leaving voluntarily is the best choice. Why are you stopping her? You'll understand in the future. But, I want to know now. Leger smiled bitterly. Opportunity and danger are twins, but most of the time, one will completely overshadow the other. You can only see opportunity, or you can only see danger. Han Jin said softly. If you want to know why, you can talk to Sasu about the capital of elements, Yelena, and the Grand Duke of the capital of elements. Sassu will give you an answer. Chapter 172. Considering their stamina, everyone's speed was not fast, and everyone maintained a high level of vigilance. After knowing that they had become the target of the Black Mission, no one dared to let their guard down. Compared to yesterday, the atmosphere was very oppressive. No one talked and laughed with each other, and they really couldn't laugh. Until noon, the forest was very quiet. There were very few magic beasts. Seeing that the young magicians were tired, Han Jin stopped. At this time, the sound of flowing water came from the front. In the Tarasha Mountains, water was very abundant. Springs and rivers were undoubtedly good places to rest. The clear water could wash away the tiredness of people's bodies. There were all kinds of fish living in the springs and rivers, which could be used for a change. Also, the flow of the springs and rivers wasn't constant. Every time there was a rainstorm, the width of the water would increase a lot. Day after day, year after year, the banks of the water would be relatively flat and clean. Therefore, when the mercenaries rested, they would always set up camp near the water. Wait a minute. Leger's figure appeared in front of everyone. There are a few mercenaries there. We should go in another direction. How many mercenaries are there? Han Jin frowned slightly. 2. They are all warriors. Let's go upstream, Sassu said. Are we shameful? Han Jin sneered. Let's move on. Maybe it was because he drank a lot of dragon blood, or maybe it was because he had mastered the art of alchemy, but his self-confidence was unprecedentedly high. Anyway, Han Jin's attitude was getting more and more aggressive. Not to mention a few mercenaries, even if he met Dean Scott of the God's Language Magic Academy, he wouldn't give in. He even attacked first and injured the 9th-grade swordsman, Harry. In the past, who would have thought that Han Jin would be so arrogant? Leger was stunned. Then he shrugged his shoulders and walked forward. The others hurriedly followed behind Leger. After walking past a huge ancient tree, the area in front of them suddenly opened up. On the bank of a small river, 2 soldiers were sitting on both sides, talking and laughing loudly. Seeing Leger and the others coming out, one of the soldiers stood up and jumped to his companion's side, giving way to the right bank of the river. The 2 warriors were about the same size. They were both very burly, but they were a size smaller than Morrison's. Their appearances were different, but their temperaments were very similar. When they talked and laughed loudly, their cheeks shook, and their laughter was loud and forthright. However, there was no smile in their eyes at all. They were calm and indifferent, which gave people the illusion that they were brothers. Seeing the 2 warriors, Chipango's expression changed abruptly. He couldn't help but look around as if he was looking for someone. However, he hid it very well, and the people around him didn't notice anything strange about him. Both of them didn't have the habit of greeting strangers, and were busy with their own things. At first, the young magicians were a little nervous, but later, Han Jin sat on a rock close to the shore. Although his posture was very leisurely, with one hand supporting his chin, his eyes wandering, and even his toes tapping on the water, all the magicians felt at ease. After a period of training, they had all become much smarter. They knew that Han Jin was deliberately sitting there to block the enemy's attack route. If the 2 mercenaries suddenly attacked, they would have to go through Han Jin first. Sassu frowned. He felt that the 2 warriors in front of him looked familiar, but he couldn't remember where he'd seen them before. Han Jin's eyes had a thoughtful look. Obviously, he and Sassu had the same feeling. After a while, the young magicians sat together to replenish their food. The 2 warriors in front of them were roasting something with a fire. A fragrant smell came with the wind, and the smell was very tempting. "Friend, do you want one?" A warrior stood up with a grilled fish in his hand. "This is a big mouth fish. It's very delicious." Before Han Jin and the others could say anything, a clear angry shout came from the forest. "Stop right there!" A dark light that was hard to detect with the naked eye shot out from the forest and penetrated the rock behind the warrior like a bolt of lightning. Then, countless tiny cracks appeared on the rock. The cracks gradually widened, and the rock that was more than a meter tall was quietly turned into a pile of tiny gravel. What was even more frightening was that the gravel was still breaking apart. In the end, it even turned into dust. As the wind blew, the dust rose high into the air like a faint mist. The warrior's expression suddenly became very ugly. He looked around and asked tentatively, "Edwina, is that you?" As soon as he finished speaking, 2 elven archers walked out of the forest. Compared to the 2 warriors in front of them, these 2 elves looked more like sisters. Their hair was blue, and their noses, eyes, lips, and even their figures were similar. The soft armor they wore and the longbows in their hands were exactly the same as well. The only difference was that one of the elves had a pair of curved eyebrows, which added a bit of elegance to her, while the other elf's eyebrows were like blades, giving people a sense of sharpness. "Julia, why are you here?" The warrior's expression became even uglier. "Why can't I be here?" The elf called Julia replied coldly. The young magicians moved, but they didn't act rashly. They just formed a formation and surrounded Yelena and Sassu. Leger's figure quietly disappeared, and Morrison stood beside Han Jean with his sword in hand. However, Sunir's expression was very strange. She stared blankly at the 2 elves, her eyes full of surprise. "Hayden, you're willing to sell your soul to the devil for just 3 dragon crystals, right?" the other elf said coldly. Obviously, she was Edwina. I don't understand what you mean." The warrior called Hayden shook his head, but his movements were very slow, or rather, very difficult. "Where's Gibran? Get out here!" Julia shouted. Her 2 blade-like eyebrows were already furrowed. It seemed that she was very emotional. Chipango's mouth was wide open. When he saw the 2 warriors, he thought that the Red Vanguards had already set up a sure-kill ambush here, so he had been thinking about how he could escape. Who knew that this would happen? How could the Red Vanguards have internal strife? A figure flashed out from behind a tree more than 100 meters away on the other side of the river, and then slowly moved towards them. Julia's gaze was locked on Gibran, but Gibran's gaze didn't move. He didn't dare to look into Julia's eyes. His expression was as ugly as the 2 warriors. "Gibran, I'm not questioning you as a companion," Julia said coldly. "I'm asking you as your fiancé, and I hope you can give me an explanation. Why?" "Julia, I really don't understand. Why are you so angry?" Gibran spread out his hands, but his fingertips were trembling violently. This was almost impossible for a high-level thief. "We just accepted a mission. Because the target was a magus, I didn't want you to be in danger, so you purposely made us go to the Eastern District?" Edwina sneered. "Gibran, you're very smart, but don't treat us like idiots. When you made us leave, your eyes had already revealed your secret. Gibran, I admit that you have feelings for Julia. If you weren't worried about Julia, you wouldn't have let us see through you so easily, but we still can't forgive you. What's going on? What's going on?" The warrior called Hayden jumped up and shouted in a frantic tone. He pointed at Sunir. "All right, I admit. When we were investigating, we found that the little elf had come to the Lily Hotel to look for you. She might be your friend, so we hesitated. But can a little elf compare to 3 dragon crystals? They're dragon crystals. Don't King spout nonsense." The other warrior was furious. He pushed Hayden to the side and said with a heavy expression, "Julia, Edwina, don't be angry. Hayden likes to talk nonsense. Actually, Gibran already told us that no matter what happens, we can't hurt that little elf. Really, I can swear on my life." Julia and Edwina looked at each other coldly, not saying anything. "Julia, Edwina, I think you can understand that we really need those 3 dragon crystals," the soldier said in a sincere tone, "especially you, Julia." Gibran is ruthless to the people outside, but how does he treat you? He treats you like a treasure bestowed by the heavens, the only one in his life. Can't you see how much he likes you? If necessary, he's even willing to cut out his own heart for you, Julia. Now, for a little elf, you're treating us like this, treating Gibran like this. Have you forgotten that we've gone through fire and water together and faced all dangers together? Is it really worth it? Plus, we never wanted to hurt her. Little elf. Edwina laughed bitterly, then waved at Sunir. Julia's face turned pale. The warrior's heart-wrenching words reminded her of the past. She would be lying to herself if she said that she did not care. There was a saying, blood is thicker than water. They fought together, shed blood together, shared happiness together, and endured hardships together. She would still remember the name Red Vanguards even after a few decades, let alone forget about it now. She would remember every single member of the Red Vanguards because this was her other home. Sunir walked towards Edwina without hesitation. Morrison's was a bit nervous and purposely blocked Sunir, but Sunir avoided Morrison's expressionlessly and continued to walk towards Edwina. Clearly, she had a very special relationship of trust with the two elves. She's Sunir. Edwina gently held Sunir's hand. Do you know what Sunir means to us elves? What does it mean? Gibran asked with difficulty. Edwina's other hand reached towards Sunir's mask, but she pulled back halfway and whispered, Sunir, is that okay? Sunir sighed and reached out to take off her mask. Seeing Sunir's face, Gibran and the others' expressions changed again and again. Their eyes were filled with panic, confusion, and nervousness. With the experience of the Red Vanguards, they obviously wouldn't be mesmerized by someone's beauty. They were shocked by something else. Sunir is the descendant of war god Abraham and elf messenger Doreen. Edwina said word by word. Right now we are Sunir's friends regardless of status, but if there's any danger, we elves will not hesitate to die for Sunir, including our queen. Do you understand? The atmosphere became deathly silent. After a while, the warrior called Hayden suddenly roared. His voice was as unpleasant as if someone had cut it with a knife. Are you mistaken? If this little elf— No, Lady Sunir's identity is so noble, then she should be hiding in Wild Willow City. Why are you elves allowing her to run around? Why? Even the stupidest person would know that they had violated a taboo that should never be violated. After reaching adulthood, traveling around the continent is a tradition set by war god Abraham. Hayden, do you have the right to question Abraham? Edwina said coldly. Han Jean was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, he understood many things. Morrison's was wild and unrestrained, while Leger was arrogant and stubborn. Why would they both give in to Sunir? This had nothing to do with Han Jean. It had nothing to do with strength. It had nothing to do with personality. Morrison's hated women being rough with him. Sylvia would often pull his ear, and if she angered him, he would even hit her on the spot. However, whenever Sunir was angry, he would be like a frightened rabbit, running away as far as he could. Why? War god Abraham, elf messenger Doreen. Han Jean was too familiar with these two names. Sassu would often talk about epics, and every time he did, he would definitely mention Abraham and Doreen. During the invasion of the Abyssal race, the surface races were at an extreme disadvantage at the beginning. It was war god Abraham, holy knight Gotha, elf messenger Doreen, and Mountain King Dante who held up the last line of defense for the surface races. It could even be said that without them, the world would not exist today. After decades of war, Abraham and Doreen's strength had already shown signs of breaking through to the 12th level. What was after the 12th level? Demigods? Or gods? No one knew. People only knew that Abraham and Doreen had become the nightmare of the Abyssal race. Wherever they went, the morale of the Abyssal race army would drop to the lowest point. Their supreme strength alone was not enough to make them legends that people would remember and sing about for countless years. The key was that they were a pair of heroes full of tragedy, and they even acted out a love story of life and death. In the early stage of the Abyssal Race's general retreat, a black dragon named Havana sought refuge with Mountain King Dante. Now people insisted that it must be a conspiracy of the Black Dragons. Havana used vivid words to describe the future of Mountain King Dante. The Abyssal Race was about to retreat, and the continent would definitely be unified. Then, who would be the real king? Dante's ambition soared rapidly. He thought hard for a long time and set up a large-scale banquet, inviting Abraham, Gotha, and Doreen to attend. Gotha discovered that an army of the Abyssal Race was quietly sneaking into the depths of the continent, so he chased after them with his army. He did not have time to attend the banquet, but Abraham and Doreen did not suspect anything and gladly came. However, Dante suddenly attacked Abraham and Doreen at the banquet. Abraham was a human, but Doreen was an elf. Everyone knew that an elf's life was much longer than a human's. At the end of the war, Abraham was already old. It was a sad thing to be a hero past his prime, but Doreen was still very young. Once, Abraham worriedly asked Doreen what would happen to Doreen when he felt that his life was gradually fading away. Doreen answered him in a casual tone. Nothing could separate them, not even death. Abraham laughed and alienated Doreen from then on. He did not doubt Doreen, but he knew her character well. She looked weak on the outside, but she was resolute on the inside. She would do what she said she would do. Abraham also took in a dozen young and beautiful maids, and he fooled around with them every day. He hoped that his behavior would make Doreen feel disgusted. No one would die for a person they hated. This was the only way he could think of. Unfortunately, after decades of husband and wife, Doreen understood Abraham too well. She even knew the whole process of Abraham's blonde hair gradually turning gray, and the origin of every wrinkle on Abraham's face. She loved this man very much. At the banquet, Doreen used her own actions to put a full stop to her promise. Abraham was hit by the tree demon's entangling roots and could not escape, but Doreen had countless opportunities to use the space scroll. She did not leave but stayed by Abraham's side. Compared to this man, the mission of the goddess of nature, the responsibility on her shoulders, and the hope of her people were so insignificant. She knew that Abraham, who was regarded as the leader of the whole continent, would also abandon everything for her. This sudden change caused the races on the ground to pay a heavy price. Abraham, the god of war, and Doreen, the elf messenger, died. Damtin, the king of hills, was seriously injured, and nearly half of the dwarves who were willing to follow him were killed. Humans, elves, and dwarves were originally the three strongest races on the continent. In order to achieve his ambition, Damtin, the king of hills, dragged his own people down with him. But this was not the end. When the Saint Knight Gotha heard the news, he vomited blood and fainted on the spot. When he woke up, he immediately led his army back to the kingdom of Dwarf. Damtin was shocked and sent a messenger to see Gotha. He promised to share the continent with Gotha, but Gotha did not say a word. He waved his hand and ordered the messenger to be pushed out and killed directly. Normally, with Damtin's ability, he would not do such a stupid thing. However, the saying "blinded by greed" told people that no matter how smart a person was, he would become a real idiot under certain conditions for some reason. Damtin sent another messenger to see Gotha. He offered the underworld god armors he had collected to Gotha. He only wanted to keep the territory of the kingdom of dwarves and give the rest to Gotha. Still, Gotha did not say a word. "Push out the messenger and kill him." One of Gotha's most trusted subordinates came out to stop him. He said that the abyssal races were still threatening the continent, and he could not do anything that would hurt his friends and make his enemies happy. Gotha raised his spear expressionlessly. "Kill!" However, in front of a group of horrified subordinates, Gotha finally said, "If I can't even protect my comrades, then what's the point of protecting the continent? Don't underestimate the power of morality. Many dwarves thought that their king was too despicable and shameless. When they heard that Gotha's army had arrived, they all came out to greet them. But Gotha's answer was still the same: kill. In the end, Gotha massacred Damtin's main city and killed Damtin, who had not yet recovered from his injuries. The elites of the dwarven race were also killed in that battle. Gotha's experience was as cruel as Abraham's, but their personalities were different. Abraham was an emotional leader, while Gotha was a tough guy. He had been captured and tortured cruelly, but he did not shed a tear. The army that he had spent countless efforts to build was besieged. In the end, he only escaped with a few guards, but he still did not shed a tear. He had a huge family behind him. When the abyssal races saw him as a thorn in their side, they captured a large number of his family members and executed them one by one in horrible ways. Among them were his father, mother, his uncles, and his underage son and daughter. He still did not shed a tear. But in the face of the remains of Abraham and Doreen, Gotha burst into tears. Whether it was strength, personal charisma, or strategic and tactical leadership, Abraham was a well-deserved leader. He was also the only person that Gotha admired from the bottom of his heart. Now that Abraham and Doreen were dead, and Damtin had also died in his hands, he had no other choice. He could not cooperate with a guy that he hated so much. Could he, alone, support the whole war? So he cried for the future of the world, cried in despair. According to the epic, Gotha's loss of self-control affected his subordinate. The people's cries were earth-shattering, and the scene was extremely tragic. After bringing back the remains of Abraham and Doreen, Gotha destroyed his war spear with his own hands and left. Since then, no one knew where he went. It could be said that this was the weakest time for the surface races. The four heroes almost left the stage at the same time. However, the abyssal races were also weak. Suddenly there was a rebellion underground. They could only give up this great opportunity and retreat underground. The god of war Abraham, the saint knight Gotha, the elf messenger Doreen, and the mountain king Damtin formed an invincible iron wall. But in the face of benefits, it collapsed in the blink of an eye. It was really a regrettable thing. The saint knight Gotha's revenge was too cruel. All the dwarves that appeared in his sight had to be buried together with Abraham and Doreen. He was criticized by some people who were full of justice. In the end, he ignored the threat of the abyssal races, abandoned his responsibility, and left. He was even called a coward by others. On the other hand, Abraham and Doreen were tragic heroes. Even the most critical people could not find fault with them, so Gotha's influence was far less than the latter two. Morrisons and Leger were humble, and Gibran and the others were in awe of Sunir. It was the glory left behind by the god of war Abraham and the elf messenger Doreen. It was the supreme glory. For many years, this glory had been influencing generations of powerhouses. It told them what justice was, what faith was, and what loyalty was. Although the chaotic situation had been going on for a long time, and justice, faith, and other good things were collapsing and being forgotten everywhere, facing Sunir, looking at the divine spark mark on Sunir's forehead, and recalling the deeds of Abraham and Doreen, even the most arrogant people would become cautious, or at least have a sense of awe. "Julia," Gibran said in a trembling voice. Only then did he realize how stupid he had been. "Stop." Julia suddenly raised her longbow, and said word by word, "Back off, I don't trust you." Gibran's body suddenly froze. With every word Julia said, his face turned paler. "Originally, I could have posted it at around 5 p.m., but I stopped halfway and was condemned by all of you, so I could only bite the bullet and continue writing. For the sake of the word count, please forgive me. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidien.com to read more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Author's Note. Chapter 173. The two soldiers looked at Gibran's back worriedly. They were in the wrong. They knew that Sunir was Julia and Edwina's friend, and they had tricked Julia and Edwina out of greed for the 3 magic crystals. Now that their plot had been exposed, they felt guilty towards Julia and Edwina, so they couldn't persuade Gibran, nor did they have the right to blame Julia for being heartless. It was a magician wearing a black magic robe. He looked at Gibran, then said to Julia with a bitter face, "Julia, you can't blame Gibran. It was all my idea. You know how important the dragon crystals are to me. I really wanted those 3 magic crystals. Actually, Gibran didn't want to take this mission, but I insisted. Cain, we've known each other for so long. Do you think I don't know what kind of person you are?" Julia sneered. "You don't seem to have any desire for profit. Sometimes I find it strange. How did you become a 9th-grade magician? Do you really want to say that this was all your idea?" Julia's words pierced Cain's heart. If this 9th-grade magician didn't have a strong desire for profit, then who had a strong desire for profit? Whose idea was all this? Cain was speechless. He wasn't usually good with words. Julia's words were so sharp that he didn't know how to explain himself. Suddenly, Han Jin, who was sitting there quietly as if he was watching a play, turned his head and looked at the southeast corner of the forest. Immediately after, the magician named Cain also sensed something. He hurriedly cast a magic shield on himself and turned to the southeast corner. The members of the Red Vanguards were all experienced mercenaries, and they cooperated well with their companions. Although they didn't notice anything strange, they knew what they had to do when they saw Cain's actions. Only Gibran seemed to be in a daze. Leger had already disappeared into thin air. As a high-grade thief, Gibran was still staring at Julia. 3 figures walked out of the forest side by side. They were all warriors, but their positions were a bit strange. They walked side by side, which meant that they were on the same side. However, they kept a certain distance from each other, as if they didn't completely trust each other. "It's so lively." The warrior in the middle smiled and said, "Gibran, I didn't expect you to be interested in this mission too." The warrior's words had a deep impact on Gibran. As the leader of the Red Vanguards, he might not be the strongest, but he had to be the calmest and most meticulous person. Unexpectedly, Gibran suddenly roared. His voice was hoarse, and there was a strange tremor to it. His entire face was severely distorted, and he looked very ferocious. "Scram! Scram!" The soldier didn't expect Gibran to not give him any face at all. His expression changed, and he said coldly, "Gibran, open your eyes and look at the situation now. We've already formed an alliance with the Red Light Mercenary Group and the Free Eagles Mercenary Group. As for the 3 dragon crystals, we'll take 1 each. If you're smart, get out of the way and don't get in our way. We're still friends. If you don't want to be smart, then from now on, there will be no more Red Vanguards in isolated Cliff City." As soon as the warrior finished speaking, a group of vague figures appeared in the dense forest. They couldn't estimate the exact number, but there were at least a few hundred of them. This time, it was the Red Vanguard's turn to be nervous. 2 warriors stood in front to protect Cain, while Edwina, Julia, and Sunir quickly approached Yelena. Yelena was their primary target, and no matter what kind of conflict happened, the enemy would definitely point their spear at her in the end. The battle was about to break out, but Gibran's slightly trembling body suddenly stabilized miraculously, and his expression gradually calmed down. He quietly looked at the 3 warriors in front of him and didn't say a word. "What do you think, Gibran? Gibran, do you want to be an enemy or a friend?" The warrior enunciated each word clearly. Gibran suddenly turned his head to look at Julia. For Julia, he could give up this mission, but Julia was now standing with his target. Obviously, as long as Sunir was here, they would have to fight side by side with Sunir. "What should I do?" A bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Just a moment ago, he was preparing to attack these people, but now he had to protect them? This world is so funny. Han Jin yawned lazily. It was really incomprehensible that he would yawn in such a tense atmosphere. However, neither the Red Vanguards nor the mercenaries paid attention to Han Jin. In their eyes, Han Jin was just a pitiful little character, or even a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Who would pay attention to a lamb? But here, Han Jin was the absolute center of attention. Seeing Han Jin's leisurely attitude, the young magicians suddenly felt very safe. Their nervousness and panic all disappeared. They were confident that they could face any challenge, although they didn't know where this confidence came from. Raphael. He's actually in the mood to yawn. Sunir didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Was he like this before? Yelena asked with a smile. No, he used to be nervous, scared, and angry. Sunir narrowed her eyes, as if she was recalling something. But I don't know when he became like this. That's because he's been growing at an unimaginable speed. He's qualified to be like this. Yelena sighed. She more or less knew some stories about Han Jin. In just over a year, Han Jin had turned from a destitute little noble into a real powerhouse. This speed was unimaginable. At least, she couldn't maintain her pride and confidence in front of Han Jin. Not to mention that Han Jin had saved her several times. One had trained hard for more than 10 years, while the other had only used 1 year. What was there to be proud of? You don't seem to be afraid at all? Sunir looked at Yelena with some surprise. In the past, Yelena would have already begun to release magic in a frenzy, attacking everything that threatened her. But now, Yelena clearly had some things that she didn't have before, such as patience and calmness. What am I afraid of? Yelena's gaze slowly turned to Han Jin. He said that he would protect me. People really shouldn't speak carelessly. No matter how sincere Han Jin was when he made the promise, Yelena remembered it firmly. But no one knew how long she would remember it. Now? How many days? Or maybe forever? Julia and Edwina were both surprised and inexplicable, and their gazes turned to Han Jin at the same time. Who was this person? How dare he boast that he would protect a magus? Han Jin looked up at the sky, then stood up and said indifferently, "Do you still want to fight?" The warrior on the opposite side suddenly looked at Han Jin and said with a grim smile, "Fight? Are we really going to fight? Kid, do you think we brought a few hundred people here to sightsee?" The warrior said contemptuously, then looked at Gibran. "Gibran, if you step aside we can still be friends. As for the dragon crystals, the 3 of us will give you some compensation." "Gibran, listen carefully, we're not afraid of you," another warrior said coldly. "Although we're not friends, we're still familiar with each other. If we take a step back and give you compensation, you have to take a step back and don't make it difficult for us." Gibran lowered his head sadly, then waved his hand, and the members of the Red Vanguards all retreated upstream. Obviously, they didn't want to interfere. But just as they lowered their heads and swam upstream, their eyes flashed with a cold, ferocious light. In fact, the development of the situation was very abnormal. The most terrifying person here wasn't Gibran or the mercenary leaders, but Yelena. It was normal that no one thought highly of Han Jin. Han Jin and the others had been unknown in isolated Cliff City, but it was difficult to understand why they looked down on a magister. It could only be said that the messenger sent by Lord Forza in Fado City was too good at advertising. In his description, Yelena was a clumsy magister with no actual combat experience, and she was almost killed by a thief who was much weaker than her. Every year, a large number of rookies joined the mercenary team. As experienced mercenaries, they knew how naive and childish the rookies were. In their eyes, Yelena was just a relatively powerful rookie, but no matter how powerful a rookie was, she was still a rookie. Chipango's mercenary team was only a second-rate one, but they dared to have designs on Yelena. This was the power of advertising. All the mercenaries ignored the fact that Yelena had become a magister at such a young age. In addition to her talent and the support of her family, her intelligence and perception were extraordinary. She didn't realize her shortcomings before, so naturally, she couldn't make any progress. Now that she had experienced so much, how could she continue to be ignorant? The ordeal of coming back from the dead was enough to change an ordinary person, let alone Yelena, who was amazingly intelligent. How long can you hold on? Han Jin turned around and asked with a smile. Shouldn't you be the one holding on? Yelena didn't want to accept Han Jin's suggestion. She wanted to release powerful magic and blast these arrogant guys into pieces. I can't hold on. There are too many of them. Han Jin shook his head. You're so straightforward. Yelena laughed and then paused. Very long. If she only released a defensive shield and kept it running, she was confident that she could hold on for a long time. Then I'm relieved. Han Jin waved his hand and suddenly, an extremely dazzling sharp light appeared between heaven and earth. Compared to this sharp light, the noon sun seemed very dim. Except for a few powerful mercenaries who could barely control themselves, most people couldn't help but close their eyes. Chapter 174. To be more precise, it was a flying rainbow that suddenly appeared between the heavens and the earth, bringing with it a dazzling light. From the moment it appeared, it firmly grabbed everyone's attention. What was even more strange was that such a fierce magic had no fluctuations at all. As long as you closed your eyes, you couldn't feel anything. This was simply incomprehensible. The speed of the flying sword could no longer be described as lightning. It carried a kind of arrogance that could travel thousands of miles in an instant, with a kind of indestructible sharpness, and directly shot towards the warrior in the middle. But that warrior was not an ordinary person. Being able to make friends with Gibran, the leader of the Red Vanguards, even if it was just a nodding acquaintance, at least his strength was recognized by Gibran. After the initial shock, he was able to pull out his long sword in time, release his protective Do-Chi to the extreme in an instant, and counterattack the flying sword. Han Jin made a hand sign, and the flying sword miraculously disappeared, then appeared behind the warrior, quietly chopping towards the warrior's neck. If it was just a fight between two people, this sword strike would be extremely insidious. However, that warrior had a friend beside him. The warrior on the left suddenly realized that something was wrong. He took a step forward and jumped 7 or 8 meters away. He waved his long sword and tried his best to meet Flying Rainbow. The warrior on the right raised his short battle axe and also rushed forward. However, his fighting style should be based on strength, so his speed was a little slower than his companion. A tragic scene ensued. As veteran mercenaries, they knew very well what the most important rule of the jungle was. One must always be vigilant. Only by maintaining enough vigilance could one be qualified to survive in this world. Although they had already formed an alliance, who didn't want to take the 3 dragon crystals alone? People always liked to use their own thoughts to judge others, not to mention that they were not a team that cooperated all year round, but a temporary alliance. To put it bluntly, this was also the reason why the 3 of them kept a distance of 7 or 8 meters. No one could completely trust each other. When the warrior in the middle saw his 2 allies attacking him one after another, he didn't have time to think. He roared and swung his sword to block the long sword that was attacking him first. Then, he turned his body and dodged the short axe that was attacking him from behind. At this time, he caught a glimpse of the extremely sinister Flying Rainbow from the corner of his eyes. Unfortunately, it was all too late. His ally's sword that could have saved him was blocked by him, and the short axe was a little bit slower, and this little bit of distance made the situation irreversible. Blood splashed as the Flying Rainbow attacked his neck. Without the protection of armor, it was impossible for him to block the attack of the Flying Rainbow. The warrior's neck was neatly cut off, and his head flew high into the air. Then, the Flying Rainbow moved to the side, avoiding the sweep of the short axe, and continued to chase after the warrior and penetrated his head. The next moment, the flying rainbow emitted a dazzling light, bypassed the attacks of the two warriors at an unimaginable speed, and returned to Han Jin's side. Han Jin stretched out his hand, took the head, and gently put it on the rock next to him. He showed a sarcastic smile and said to the head that died with eyes open, "Do you still want to fight?" On both sides of the river there was dead silence. The members of the Red Vanguards were also stunned, and their faces were full of horror. They never thought that there was such a fierce character hidden among the few unknown mercenaries. With only one strike, he killed a famous mercenary group leader. What would they do if they were in his place? In fact, this was not unacceptable. Many people had the same threat, such as the Reaper mercenary team and the Dragon Singer mercenary group. Moreover, the battles between mercenaries had always been very dangerous, and the slightest mistake could result in blood spilling on the spot. What shocked them even more was Han Jin's leisurely and relaxed expression after killing the man, as if there was no one else around. If you wanted to overwhelm your opponent with your aura, you would have to show your strength with your fierce eyes and fierce actions. However, Han Jin looked very free and easy. He could be said to be a beautiful young man on a scenic tour, or a big brother next door, but he didn't look like a murderer who had just killed someone. Only you guys are left. How should we divide the 3 dragon crystals? 1 for each person, 2 for each person? That's a bit unfair. Han Jin's gaze turned to the 2 warriors. Let me help you. If I kill one more, there's no need to divide them, right? Han Jin didn't like to talk nonsense. Just now, his original intention was to immediately release Earthmeld and sneak into the dense forest to kill, but the actions of the warriors gave him some clues. This was also a kind of quick-wittedness. He wanted to destroy the fragile unity between them before the battle broke out. The 2 soldiers looked at each other, and suddenly stood side by side. The warrior with the short axe roared, "Kill him!" Fireballs and lightning bolts flew out from the forest, mixed with a shower of arrows. However, none of the attacks were aimed at Han Jin. They were all focused on the seemingly defenseless Yelena. Yelena sneered and raised the magic staff in her hand into the air. An extremely pure magic shield appeared and quickly spread out, covering all her companions around her. The next moment, dozens of magic detection halos bloomed almost simultaneously in all directions, covering the space of a few hundred meters around the river. One of them even fell on Gibran. The members of the Red Vanguards looked at each other. Gibran had hidden behind his companions with the intention of quietly joining the battle, but he didn't expect that the other party wouldn't appreciate his help and would instead be wary of him. But who could he blame? Dozens of thieves who had sneaked across the river revealed themselves under the magic detection halos. Sasu roared and commanded the young magicians to attack. Sunir also drew her longbow, but the most terrifying ones were Edwina and Julia. The 2 elves' arrows didn't miss, and in the blink of an eye, more than half of the thieves fell into a pool of blood. The number of thieves killed by the 2 of them was enough to tie with Sunir and the group of young magicians. The remaining thieves fled for their lives. The shock in their hearts was indescribable. How could there be such an abnormal magician? She released dozens of magic detection halos in one breath and didn't need magic to cast spells. Also, was she really a silly rookie? They didn't know that after falling into the hands of thieves twice, Yelena had an extreme hatred for them, even bordering on paranoia. Magic detection would become the magic she loved the most in her life. She would never allow thieves to run wild in front of her no matter what. Countless spells and arrows fell on Yelena's magic shield like raindrops, but it had already been decided that Yelena's main task was to hold on. A magic shield released by a magister with all her strength was almost indestructible. The attacks of hundreds of people only caused ripples on the magic shield. Yelena's expression was calm. Obviously, she had enough confidence in herself. Leger's figure suddenly appeared beside the warrior holding a short battle axe. He swung his dagger at the warrior's neck like lightning. The warrior was stunned by the tragic scene in front of him. Moreover, Leger's judgment was very sharp. From the rescue just now, he already knew that the warrior's speed was somewhat lacking, so he targeted him. The warrior only reacted when the dagger was about to pierce his neck. It was already too late for him to block with his battle axe, let alone dodge. He could only move his shoulder to block his neck. Blood splattered. Leger's dagger had already pierced deeply into the warrior's shoulder, but he didn't follow up with another attack. Instead, he began to retreat rapidly and disappeared into thin air. Several magic detection halos followed closely. Unfortunately, the range released by the magicians couldn't compare to that of a magister, and their speed was more than a beat slower, so they overlapped again. Leger was very cautious. After swinging his dagger, regardless of whether it hit or not, he would immediately retreat. Several magic detection halos had no effect. The light of the flying rainbow lit up again. Han Jin had applied the spirit possession art on himself and was following the tail of the flying rainbow, shooting straight forward. Kill! The warrior with the short battle axe was injured on the right side. Knowing that his combat ability had decreased sharply, he hurriedly retreated. The other warrior fearlessly faced Han Jin. His speed might not be as fast as the rainbow, but it was comparable to Han Jin's. The corner of Han Jin's mouth curled up into a smile. His body leaned to the side and faced the warrior. However, there was a subtle change in the angle of his dash. After experiencing battle after battle, not only did his cultivation and experience in Dao grow, but his combat instincts also grew. It must be known that even the most exquisite combat techniques were gradually evolved through bloody battles. Han Jin was repeating a very ancient process. The dazzling rainbow shot up into the sky and bypassed the warrior blocking its way. The warrior had no time to support his companion. He had already made a quick decision. As long as he killed Han Jin, that magic would definitely lose its effectiveness. In the midst of a crazy roar, a long sword wrapped in a dazzling light of fighting aura stabbed straight at Han Jin's chest. Looking at the unstoppable force, if this sword pierced through, it would not be as simple as piercing a hole in the body. Han Jin's body might explode into pieces. From Han Jin's angle, he could no longer see the warrior with the short battle axe. Obviously, the other party could not see him either. Han Jin faced the long sword and fell forward. The dazzling sword light passed through his back, and he fell into the ground and disappeared without a trace. The warrior with the battle axe saw that the situation was not good. He hurriedly passed the battle axe to his left hand and swept it back in the air, trying to block the terrifying rainbow. But at this moment, Han Jin's figure rose from behind him like a ghost. He waved his palm forward and lightly patted. His palm seemed to be weak, but when it hit the warrior's back, it made a loud bang. The warrior could not help but fall forward. Get lost! With a roar, the warrior who was tricked by Han Jin threw his sword back. It hit the rainbow from the back. The rainbow was knocked to the side and brushed past the warrior with the battle axe. Although it did not hurt him, it frightened him and made him break out in a cold sweat. What kind of fighting spirit a person possessed, or whether they were a brave warrior or a coward, would be displayed vividly at this moment. The warrior with the battle axe had just narrowly escaped death, but he immediately swung his battle axe, sweeping flying rainbow from the side. With a bang, the rainbow was hit and flew out. Han Jin's figure also shook violently. He hurriedly made a hand sign. Without looking back, he controlled the flying sword to fly straight into the dense forest. He did not want to continue to be entangled with the two warriors. Chapter 175. When Han Jin rushed into the forest, the mercenaries didn't panic. Although Han Jin was a huge threat and even killed a famous mercenary group leader in the blink of an eye, these mercenaries who lived on the edge of life and death all year round were mentally strong. The people at the front began to attack Han Jin, while the rest of the mercenaries continued to release spells and arrows in an attempt to destroy Yelena's magic shield. This wasn't just to kill the final mission target as soon as possible. Whether it was those who looked down on Yelena or those who were vigilant, they all knew that they couldn't let a magus free up to release large-scale offensive spells. Otherwise, it would definitely cause a calamity of destruction. In fact, the mercenaries still had the upper hand. Only Han Jin and Leger dared to charge forward. Morrison's, Sassu, and Sunir could only hide behind the magic shield. There were so many mages and archers that if they left the magic shield, they would be killed in an instant. The mercenaries had already sent out dozens of warriors and rushed across the river from both sides, shouting as they surrounded them. The mercenaries' tactics were very mature. With them distracting the mages' attention, their companions in the forest didn't need to defend and could attack with all their might. Everything was for the sake of ending the battle as soon as possible. Julia and Edwina looked at each other. Then, Julia took out a green arrow from her quiver and slowly drew her longbow, aiming at the mercenaries who were coming from the left flank. Edwina immediately understood Julia's intention and hurriedly said to Sunir, "You guys attack the right flank." "Sassu, right flank," Sunir shouted. The ferocious faces were getting closer and closer. The reward for this mission was 3 dragon crystals. Even if everyone could only get a little, it would be enough for them to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. If they were tired of this bloody life, they could retire early and enjoy peace. How could they not give their lives in this final battle? The young magicians panicked when they saw the enemies approaching at a high speed. Cessation bellowed, "Use all your magic power! Attack! Attack!" Before he finished his roar, he had already released a large fireball, hitting the mercenary who was charging at the front. With a loud bang, the fireball exploded on the mercenary's body. But in the next moment, the mercenary rushed out from the flames. The armor in front of his chest was almost destroyed by the explosion, and even his black chest hair was exposed. The light of his do-chi had dimmed a lot, and his mouth and nose were bleeding. But he still roared and continued to rush forward, completely disregarding his own life. Sunir raised her hand and shot an arrow. The arrow was like a bolt of lightning, and it accurately pierced the mercenary's mouth. The mercenary flew backward as if he had been punched in the face, knocking into his companions behind him. However, his companions mercilessly kicked him to take his place. Humans die for wealth, and birds die for food. No matter which world you were in, this was an undeniable truth. Julia's forehead was already covered in sweat. She finally released her arrow. The green light disappeared in a flash, and then a black, thick tree root suddenly drilled out of the ground. In the blink of an eye, it wrapped around the mercenaries who were charging from the left flank. "Trent's arrow! It's Julia!" A few mercenaries cried out in despair. The Red Vanguard's mercenary team was a famous mercenary team. Even those who had never seen them knew how powerful they were. The Trent's arrow was Julia's famous skill. Actually, the Trent's arrow wasn't fatal. At most, it could control them for a short period of time. After releasing the Trent's arrow, Julia's stamina would be greatly depleted, so she couldn't continue attacking. However, don't forget that Julia and Edwina were sisters. They were inseparable. The moment the tree root appeared, they already knew their fate. Edwina didn't disappoint anyone. Without any warning, a bowl-sized bloody hole appeared on a mercenary's forehead. Blood, brain matter, and broken bones flew everywhere. Before the other mercenaries could recover from this tragic scene, another mercenary's neck was hit. The arrow carried an enormous force and tore his neck apart. Blood gushed into the sky, and the large head flew high into the air. "Edwina is here too. Wind blade ripping arrow!" A mercenary let out a meaningless shout. Of course Edwina was here. The cooperation between the two sisters had always been very good. One was in charge of control, while the other was in charge of killing. Who knew how many troublesome high-level magical beasts had fallen at their hands? In a situation where they lost their ability to move and became targets, the mercenaries' defensive combat aura was useless. Even a Supreme Knight wouldn't dare ignore the joint attack of two 10th grade rangers. Gibran, what the F***ck is the meaning of this? The leaders of the two mercenary teams roared angrily at the same time. What do I mean? Gibran sighed softly, then said, we should also. At this moment, another magic detection halo flashed by. Gibran's face immediately stiffened. No matter how powerful he was, he had to use it after becoming invisible. How could he just swagger over? He wasn't a warrior. However, the great Magus had favored him so much, which was equivalent to turning him into half a piece of trash. This feeling was very vexing and also somewhat worrying. Learning a lesson wasn't something that everyone could learn in time. Sometimes, one person's blood was far from enough. The mercenaries were in a hurry to destroy Yelena's magic shield, so they only sent a few people to intercept Han Jin. Now, they had paid a heavy price for this. When a wave of arrows hit Han Jin, his body sank into the ground again. Then, he appeared behind a few mages, and with a flash, he pierced the chest of a mage on the side. Then, he swung his right fist with all his might and heavily punched the back of the mage in front of him. The mage's spine was instantly shattered, and his body was twisted in a very strange posture. He felt something soft on the back of his head, and then he realized that it was his butt. Then, everything turned into endless darkness. Han Jin's body turned into an arrow, a strange and unpredictable arrow. Han Jin's body was like a gust of wind, an erratic wind. He moved through the forest at an extremely fast speed. Sometimes, he rushed in front, and the dazzling rainbow followed closely behind him. Sometimes, the rainbow shot forward, and Han Jin's figure was hidden in the light that no one dared to look directly at. Han Jin had no intention of attacking the archers. Instead, he focused his attention on the mages one after another. Wherever he passed, there would be a bloody storm. Although the mages hurriedly released magic shields, they could only block Han Jin's fist. In front of the dazzling rainbow, the magic shields released by their magic power were too weak. They almost collapsed at the first touch, and then blood splattered everywhere. Han Jin's speed was extremely fast, and with the cover of the rainbow, it was difficult for the archers to lock onto Han Jin. They were also afraid of accidentally injuring their companions, so it was inevitable that they would hesitate. The warriors who came to surround Han Jin were very clumsy. They could not catch up with Han Jin at all. Even if their movements were very clever, and they occasionally surrounded Han Jin in the middle, Han Jin would appear again in the distance with a earth meld. It could be said that Han Jin was a person who cherished his life very much. No matter what he did, he had to ensure that he could survive. Otherwise, everything would be a bubble. Therefore, when he absorbed the earth element magic crystals, he used all the earth element to create the earthmeld talismans. He was even reluctant to create the faked earth corpse for Morrison's. Han Jin was not selfish. Only he could unleash the full potential of magic. At this stage, he could not afford to waste any of it. Although he did not help Morrison's, he had never put any burden on Morrison's. What he was doing now was what Morrison's should do. He had already placed all the burden on himself. There were also smart people among the mercenaries. When a mage saw Han Jin charging straight at him, he did not dodge. Instead, he suddenly released an electric arc. Han Jin's body suddenly stiffened, and then a large green web covered Han Jin tightly. Web. This was a rare opportunity. One magic after another landed on Han Jin. It was a colorful scene. Perhaps it was because Han Jin's body was too fast and strange, so the mages all chose to release status magic. Among them, there was not a single offensive magic. This was the first time Han Jin was covered by a large-scale magic. He felt like his legs were filled with lead, incomparably heavy. His eyes turned black, and he inexplicably lost his vision. Fortunately, he had already scattered many inconspicuous wooden worms. This was also why he was the first to discover the abnormality in the forest. Therefore, he could still see the changes in his surroundings. There was actually a dark mage hiding in the group of mages. Han Jin's body became extremely weak. His stomach was empty, as if he could not summon any strength. His mind was filled with sad memories. There were memories of the other world, the strangeness of this world, and even fear. He suddenly felt tired and wanted to turn around and leave. He even had an extremely absurd thought. He did not want to move anymore. Let others kill him. Maybe this way, he could return to the other world. The archers were overjoyed. They all drew their longbows and aimed at Han Jin. At this critical moment, a white light lit up on Han Jin's body. Magic dispelling. In an instant, all kinds of magic lights on Han Jin's body disappeared without a trace. At the same time, Yelena's eyes also lit up. She suddenly understood a lot of things. The meaning of a battle was not only how many enemies one killed with one's own hand. There were other more important things, such as protecting and saving. When Han Jin rushed over, she subconsciously separated a part of her mind power and imprinted it on Han Jin. If it was someone else who did this, it would not have meant much. Only she, with her magister-level mind power, could maintain a long-distance observation. Only she could use her overwhelming advantage of magic to instantly dispel all negative magic. I saw a review left by a friend. He said that he hoped that I could finish writing this scene today, but my physical condition does not allow it. When I am in a good state, I will strive to write more words. A few days ago, I had a few outbursts, but my condition was not good enough. I really could not write. I have not recovered from my pharyngitis, and now there is another disease that is hard to talk about. I think it is caused by pharyngitis or mump. The doctor told me that this disease can only be easily contracted by children. Adults have strong immune systems and will not get it easily. He also told me that it may be complicated with meningitis, and that I will lose some abilities for the rest of my life. I am so scared that I do not dare to be careless anymore. I go out and get 2 injections every day to ensure that I get 10 hours of sleep. I used to be very healthy. When I was in school, I practiced Sanda, yoga, and Qigong. I was full of energy and almost never got sick. When a classmate was hospitalized with hepatitis, no one dared to go. I was the only one who dared to take care of him because I was confident in myself. Since I opened the internet cafe 7 or 8 years ago, my work and rest schedule have never been stable. I slept during the day and slept at night the next day. It was a mess, and I was complacent, thinking that I was strong. If it were someone else, they would have collapsed long ago. These 2 illnesses made me sober up a lot. No matter how good the body is, it shouldn't be used to abuse it. I've learned a lesson from my predecessor. Everyone, please take care of your own body. When you're playing, when you're going crazy, remember to save some energy. Chapter 176. As soon as Han Jin regained his consciousness, he cast the charm of spirit refreshment on himself. The next moment, he disappeared from the ground and reappeared behind the magician who had released the first electric arc. With the momentum of his palm, the magician was sent flying forward with a scream. Han Jin's expression had changed greatly. His pupils shrunk to the size of a needle, his eyes narrowed, and his handsome face was even twisted together. Dying in a daze would make people feel very unwilling, but this was still a small matter. The group of mercenaries should never have reminded Han Jin of the past. His master only accepted him as a disciple, and in his master's words, he couldn't accept a second disciple. Because the master and disciple's cultivation was of the same origin, they both absorbed energy, so there was an irreconcilable contradiction. When the 2 of them could absorb the energy from the same magic weapon, who should they give it to? His master always gave him the magic weapon. At first, he didn't understand, but after a long time, he slowly understood his master's painstaking efforts. Although the same energy produced a very different effect on the master and disciple, it was common knowledge that the less, the more, the more. Moreover, most cultivators were indifferent people. They only cared about the Tao and didn't care about other people's suffering. Thinking about other people's selfishness and indifference, and then thinking about his master's kindness, his gratitude couldn't be described with words. In other words, his master really treated him, Han Jin, as his own child, and he didn't have time to repay anything before he was sent to this world. This was an eternal pain in his heart, a pain that couldn't be touched. He also knew that with his master's level, he didn't have the time and energy to find a second disciple. His master searched in the vast sea of people for dozens of years before he found him. From then on, his master devoted his heart to him, especially when he just started cultivating. He didn't leave his master's side, painstakingly explained the Taoist scriptures, taught him various Taoist techniques, strengths and weaknesses, and gave him the rare treasures that he occasionally encountered. He even forgot about his own cultivation. Every day, his master had endless things to say. He used to think that his master was used to being lonely, so he wanted to find someone to talk to. He also thought that his master was too long-winded. Later, he understood that a cultivator who was about to touch the Tao couldn't even control his emotions. His master was afraid that he wouldn't be able to master it and would suffer in the future, so he wholeheartedly imparted all his understanding to him. His inexplicable disappearance was a heavy blow to master. His master had once said that he would wait for him for 10 years. That meant that his master was running out of time. This was his limit. He thought about how his master had gone against the will of heaven and earth by himself, facing the test of the heavenly tribulation with a heart full of loneliness. When he looked up, there was the silent sky, and when he lowered his head, there was the silent sand. If he failed, he would completely turn into dust, and there wouldn't even be a person to send him off. What kind of loneliness was this? At this moment, Han Jin's heart was filled with boundless killing intent. If he could, he would even destroy this world. A stone stirs up 1,000 waves. Han Jin recited in a tone full of vicissitudes, but no one here could understand his words. They only thought that it was a strange incantation. Don't let him chant. Charge! The mercenaries howled and surrounded him from all directions. They didn't understand how a magician could freely attack and chant at the same time. Unfortunately, now was not the time to think about such things. Every time Han Jin uttered a word, his body would move to another direction. Every time he uttered 7 words, he would launch 7 attacks. However, only the first magician who was attacked was injured. The rest of the magicians, under the protection of the magic barrier, only suffered light injuries at most. No one noticed that the rainbow had quietly flown out of the forest. It stopped in the air, unmoving. The dazzling light flickered as if it was waiting for something. Han Jin didn't launch any more attacks. His body floated to the left and to the right at times. Whenever he was surrounded by enemies or targeted by magic, he would release the earth-meld technique and emerge from another place. His hands, at an extremely graceful and swift speed, were constantly forming hand seals. However, the mercenaries' fighting spirit was very strong. Moreover, there were many of them. In a short period of time, he was forced to release the earth-meld technique 4 times. However, his spell was almost complete. The last time he stepped into the city alone, he was invincible. That was because Zagund had transferred all the first-rate troops away. The troops left behind were all miscellaneous troops. Moreover, the soldiers' individual combat strength wasn't very strong. Therefore, Han Jin took advantage of this loophole. However, the mercenaries' combat strength was much stronger than normal soldiers. They were also very good at this kind of chaotic battle. Han Jin charged for half a day, but the results were minimal. He couldn't affect the overall situation, and he almost lost his life. He could only use the ultimate technique that he had inherited from his master. Suddenly, Han Jin's body shot into the sky like a firework. With a wave of his hand, a flash of golden light collided with his own flying rainbow. The flying rainbow seemed to have a life of its own as it let out a sorrowful cry. In the blink of an eye, the rainbow turned into countless rays of light that scattered in all directions. The rays of light were so dense that they could be described as covering the sky. No matter where one looked, one could see the rays of light flying in all directions. Within a radius of more than 100 meters, all the tall trees and bushes collapsed at the same time. The trunks, branches, and leaves were all crushed into pieces in an instant. Clouds of smoke and dust were stirred up from the ground, and various colors were splashed everywhere. There were green leaves, brown tree roots, black soil, and red flesh. There were also fallen helmets, broken magic staffs, longbows, twisted longswords, and battle-axes. Han Jin's single attack had turned this place into a tragic slaughterhouse. Han Jin's body fell from the sky and then straightened up. No one had to hide anymore. The forest within a radius of more than 100 meters had been razed to the ground. In addition to Han Jin, there were dozens of mercenaries standing there in all kinds of panicked and embarrassed postures. The dust had settled, but they still hadn't reacted. Was it over? Under the all-pervasive attack of light and shadow, there was nowhere to hide, let alone dodge. At this moment, it was a test of one's absolute defense. The remaining dozen or so thieves and an unknown number of archers were all strangled in an instant. Almost all of the survivors were mages and warriors. They were better than their companions in terms of strength. One of them relied on a magic shield, while the other relied on their combat power to protect themselves. However, they had now become birds that were startled by the mere twang of a bow. They stood there blankly, not daring to even approach Han Jin, let alone attack. On the opposite side, Yelena, Sunir, and the others had also witnessed everything. Their expressions were not much better than those of the remaining mercenaries. Was that a small-scale forbidden spell? But why couldn't anyone feel any magical fluctuations? Also, when did Han Jin have the ability to release a forbidden spell? Han Jin slowly stretched out his hand, and scattered light spots gathered in his palm. People seemed to faintly hear a sorrowful cry, full of the taste of parting. The flying rainbow had completely disappeared from the world. When cultivators fought with each other, they didn't just rely on magic weapons. Could it be that the one with the stronger and more powerful magic weapon would be the winner? The one at a disadvantage could only close their eyes and wait for death? As the saying goes, when one is in dire straits, one will think of change. People who are in a desperate situation must try their best to survive. If one's strength was inferior, then one could only seek a breakthrough in technique. Dao also required technique. What Han Jin had released was a unique skill created by his master. However, because his master had lived for a long time and his character was somewhat rotten, he named the sword skill, "A stone stirs 1,000 waves." The waves were sword waves, the real waves of death. At that time, Han Jin felt that it wasn't cool enough, so he changed the name to Godly 1,000 Waves. As a result, he was scolded by his master for deceiving his master and destroying his ancestors. In the end, he had to compromise. This sword skill was different from Han Jin's desperate explosion of the flying sword. The latter exploded inside the Hydra's body, which produced a miraculous effect. If Han Jin had also exploded the flying sword this time, under the cover of the trees, many people might have survived. It wouldn't have been like this, where all the mercenaries were almost annihilated. What is that? The remaining 2 mercenary corps leaders looked at their sparse companions in despair, but their companions also seemed to be in despair. The 3 mercenary corps united and gathered hundreds of mercenaries, but in the blink of an eye, only a few people were left. They couldn't accept it. It's death. A sharp dagger silently pierced towards the neck of the sword-wielding warrior. Of all the people present, Gibran was probably the most strong-willed one. Of course, that was if he wasn't facing Julia. He was the first to wake up, and when Yelena forgot to bless him, he released an invisibility spell and approached the warrior. Gibran was definitely not a good person, and he wouldn't remind his opponent. When the warrior heard Gibran's words, the dagger had already pierced deeply into his throat. "Gibran, I will never let you go," the warrior with the battle axe roared as he retreated. He knew that he was doomed. With so few people left, they couldn't even deal with a small red vanguard mercenary team, let alone a magus in front of him. As for the mercenary behind him, who killed a large number of his brothers with one strike, it would be a nightmare for the rest of his life. "Want to leave?" Gibran sneered. Just as he was about to take a step forward, he suddenly stopped. In fact, Han Jin wasn't scary. His vital energy was almost exhausted. If someone attacked him at this time, he could at most escape with Earthmeld. Gibran wasn't scary either. He was just a thief, and his lethality was very limited. The scariest person was Yelena. When the warrior with the battle axe fled in panic, the remaining mercenaries covered their heads and fled. Yelena had already raised her magic staff, and at the same time, the magic shield she released quietly disappeared. Even with the ability of a magus, they could only choose between the strongest shield and the sharpest sword. On one hand, they protected themselves with a shield that no one could hurt them, while on the other, they poured out their magic attacks without any scruples. That wasn't a human, it was a god. The so-called art of battle was constantly changing the balance between attack and defense to achieve a perfect effect. A series of crisp incantations echoed between heaven and earth, and the magic fluctuations became more and more intense. Unfortunately, no one came to disturb Yelena. Even if everyone knew that letting a magus freely release magic would be a disaster, who would dare to turn back? The mercenaries only hoped that they could be the lucky ones, because they still didn't know what Yelena was going to release. The sky suddenly lit up, and immediately, streaks of lightning fell from the sky. 9-grid thunder call. 9-grid thunder call was an extremely terrifying magic. It was also known as a level 1 magic, because the power of the thunder call was directly proportional to its level. A level 3 magus could only release 1-grid thunder call, which was weak and only covered an area of a few meters. 9-grid thunder call, on the other hand, could attack the space within hundreds of meters and destroy everything within. The fleeing figures were all enveloped by the lightning. No one could see what was happening inside, and they could only hear the screams from time to time. But everyone knew that those mercenaries were doomed. Chapter 177. Looking down from the top of the mountain, one could see yesterday's battlefield. Han Jin's sword skill had destroyed hundreds of square meters of ancient trees. It was as if a girl with long hair had lost a circle of hair on her head. It was very conspicuous in the endless forest, but it was also a bit of a spoilsport. Han Jin stood alone at the edge of the cliff, overlooking the forest. He wasn't reminiscing about his victory. If his master had released his sword technique, no one would have been able to survive within the range of the sword light. In fact, he had brought shame to his master. Han Jin's thoughts drifted to somewhere else. Some things were fine if they weren't mentioned, but once they were touched, he would feel a heart-wrenching pain. Since yesterday, he hadn't been in a good mood. On yesterday's battlefield, there were 7 or 8 small black dots moving around. They were all young magicians, collecting spoils of war. Although Han Jin and Yelena had released powerful spells and destroyed many things, it didn't mean that they couldn't find anything. In Morrison's words, no matter how thin a rat's leg is, it's still meat. "Raphael, what are you doing?" Leger asked as he slowly walked over. "I'm a bit bored, so I'm staying here for a while." Han Jin's expression and tone were somewhat cold. At this moment, he just wanted to be quiet and didn't want to interact with anyone. Sunir wanted to come and see you, but she's a bit embarrassed. Leger acted as if he couldn't understand Han Jin's expression and changed the topic. Embarrassed? Han Jin was stunned. She came to stand with you for a while this morning, and after she went back, she blushed for a long time. Leger smiled. This place is too conspicuous. Everyone saw your every move in the morning. Han Jin's expression returned to indifference. Are you okay? Leger couldn't help but smile bitterly. I'm fine. You're fine, but I'm not. Leger paused. Tell me, how are you going to compensate me? Compensate? Compensate for what? Raphael, don't play dumb with me. Leger said angrily. How dangerous was yesterday? I've been following you, hoping to help you. Who would have thought that you would cast that kind of magic? Fortunately, I noticed that your face had become very scary. I knew that something was wrong and hurriedly left the forest. Otherwise, I would have died a heroic death yesterday. Han Jin's expression finally changed a little as he quietly looked at Leger. Not talking? Do you think it's over if you don't say anything? Reg said angrily. Also, didn't we set up all kinds of hand signals? You knew that I would follow you, so why didn't you give me any hints? Am I that unimportant in your heart? Do I deserve to die? If they were here to express their concern, Han Jin wouldn't have bothered with them. He missed his master, but Leger's accusation couldn't be avoided. He really was careless yesterday. At that moment, he had forgotten everything. He only knew how to vent his anger and couldn't care about anything else. If Leger didn't mention it, he wouldn't have realized that Leger was in danger. Han Jin seemed to be struggling. I'm sorry. At this moment, he didn't know what to say. Luckily, Leger was always very alert. Otherwise, he would have made a big mistake. Don't say these useless things. Leger curled his lips. I want compensation. Actually, Leger's goal wasn't to blame anyone, so he didn't continue with the why didn't you give hints question. Then tell me, what do you want? Han Jin smiled faintly. Perhaps it was because Leger was usually very calm and didn't have the experience of being unreasonable with others. He also couldn't be like Morrison's, so when Leger talked about the conditions and compensation, his expression was somewhat unnatural. Thinking about Morrison's, Han Jin's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. He thought that after Sunir, Morrison's would definitely come to persuade him. The two of them had known each other for the longest time and their relationship was very deep. Even in the same team, there were differences in the depth of the relationship between members. In comparison, Leger was the most difficult person to talk to. Who would have thought that instead of Morrison's, Leger would come? In the forest, Morrison's was sitting on a rock. His chin was resting on the hilt of his sword. His eyebrows were tightly knitted, as if he was thinking about something in life. If it was someone else, it would be fine, but it was Morrison's who was putting on airs. It was a bit ridiculous. No matter what kind of team it was, every member had their own unique and irreplaceable life path. When the team moved forward together, their paths entangled with each other and extended forward. However, they would never completely merge together, because they had to be qualified to be themselves first before they could be qualified to be a qualified member. If they couldn't even be themselves, what could they do? Morrison's had been hiding here for a very long time. He also had his own pain and helplessness. In the battle yesterday, he was the only one who didn't do anything from the beginning to the end. Even the rookie magicians helped, but what did he do? This was the second time he had tasted this feeling of powerlessness. Can you give me whatever I want? Leger chuckled. Again, if it was Morrison's who laughed, it would be normal, but when he laughed, it felt slightly artificial. However, for Han Jin, Leger's artificial smile brought him a trace of warmth. He turned to look at the sky and said lightly, "Tell me what you want. I will try my best to satisfy you, but if I can't do it, then don't blame me." Hey, what do you mean? If you can't do it, does that mean I've wasted an opportunity? At this moment, Yelena slowly walked up from below. Leger originally wanted to continue chatting with Han Jin, but when he saw Yelena, he shrugged and said, "Forget it, I'll talk to you tonight. Don't forget your promise." "Don't worry." Han Jin smiled. Yelena stepped to the side lightly. Her eyes were fixed on Han Jin as if she couldn't see Leger at all. It wasn't just today, it was the same yesterday and the day before. Yelena could chat with Sunir, Sasu, and even Morrisons, but she never pretended to be friendly with Leger. There was no other reason. As the saying goes, when the city gate is on fire, the fish in the moat will suffer. Who asked Leger to be a thief? Why are you all here one by one? Is something the matter? Han Jin asked slowly. Talking with Leger just now made him feel better. At least he was no longer immersed in the unchangeable past. It's because you're a little strange, so everyone is worried about you, Yelena said softly. Thank you. Yelena looked Han Jin up and down. Right, I have something to tell you. I talked with Edwina, and they happened to have an extra space scroll. I bought it, but Edwina insisted that she didn't want money. Sunir is very close to her. How about this, I'll give you the gold coin, and you give it to Sunir. I don't want to take advantage of others. Why didn't you give it to Sunir? I gave it to her, but she didn't want it. She said Edwina wouldn't accept it. Then forget it. Han Jin was very emotional. Once upon a time, he had to scheme for half a day just for a few silver coins. God knows how much wealth the Red Vanguard mercenary team had accumulated in the past. How generous of them to give away a space scroll for nothing. But then again, they weren't lacking in money. Dragon crystals, dragon scales, dragon horns, and dragon tendons. They could sell any one of them and make a lot of money. No, we have to find a way to make her accept it. Yelena's attitude was very firm. Han Jin was secretly amused. With Sunir's relationship with the two elves, it would be strange if they accepted the money. He paused, then changed the topic. Do you want to go back? No. Yelena smiled. Yelena froze for a moment, then smiled and said, Besides, even if I want to go back, it's not up to me. Then who has the final say? Han Jin asked subconsciously. You. Yelena nodded. You're the leader of our mercenary team. Of course, you have the final say. Wait, did you say we? Han Jin looked at Yelena in surprise. What do you mean? I realize that I'm a very naive magician. Genius? Haha. Yelena said in a self-deprecating tone. If it weren't for you, I would have died long ago. This is what I should do. I can only say that you hired the right person. No, I'm too inexperienced. So I've decided to join your mercenary team. Yelena flipped the hair in front of her forehead. I don't think you're stupid enough to refuse a magus joining, right? It's settled then. Han Jin was a little stunned. She obviously didn't mean what she said. If Han Jin was really the leader, how could it be settled without him saying anything? You're very lucky. Yelena seemed to be worried that Han Jin would continue to pester her, so she took the initiative to change the topic. Lucky? What are you talking about? Of course it's Sunir. What's wrong with Sunir? Han Jin became more and more confused. Sunir has Abraham and Doreen's divinity. Don't you know what this means? Yelena looked at Han Jin in surprise. Before you and Sunir fell in love, you didn't know anything about her? Fell in love. Han Jin was very embarrassed. Although there was nothing shameful about love, he couldn't always talk about it, right? Moreover, it was too strange to talk about love with another equally outstanding girl. Was this seduction? Or was it a discussion about life? It seems that you really don't know. The interest in Yelena's eyes became more and more intense. I don't know. In the beginning, what attracted you most about Sunir? Yelena asked. Let's not talk about this, okay? Han Jin felt like he was going to run away in defeat. Perhaps the cultural differences in the Qingxi dynasty were too big. Han Jin really didn't want to talk about this with others, but Yelena's eyes were full of purity and longing, as if everything was normal. Chapter 178. A temporary camp was quickly built. Han Jin and the others discussed for a long time and decided that they couldn't go any further. Greed was endless, and who knew how many mercenaries wanted the 3 dragon crystals? The previous attack wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Instead of fighting a battle in an unfamiliar place, it was better to stay put. After all, the mercenaries who accepted the black mission would come to them sooner or later. In Han Jin's plagiarized words, although they couldn't decide when the battle would break out, they could at least choose the battlefield. However, the Red Vanguard mercenary team was in an awkward situation. Han Jin and the others didn't guard against Edwina and Julia, but Gibran and the others couldn't. They couldn't even step into the camp, and they didn't dare. Facing Edwina and Julia, Gibran was very guilty. It wasn't that he hadn't tried before, but every time he was rejected by Julia, he would retreat dejectedly. However, he wasn't willing to leave just like that. Or rather, he knew very well that if he took a step back, what awaited him would be an irreversible eternity. He had to find a way to beg for Julia's forgiveness. After the camp was built, it was time to set up magic sentry posts nearby. Once again, Han Jin witnessed the horror of a magus. He had observed carefully that it took cessation a few seconds to release a magic sentry, and after releasing dozens of sentry posts, he needed to meditate for a while to recover the magic he had consumed. It wasn't that Sasu only had enough magic power to release dozens of magic sentries. After more than a year of training, Sasu had also learned a lot. When his magic power reached a certain level, he would meditate to maintain his full combat power, so that he could immediately enter battle at any time. Yelena's attitude when releasing magic sentries was almost like she was playing a game. She didn't put on any airs, nor did she meditate. She simply released magic sentries as she walked, and the magic sentries could be described as covering the entire mountain. Han Jin had asked Leger if there was any way to sneak into the camp under such circumstances. Leger could only shake his head. In the end, Leger was forced into a corner. If all the mages on the continent were like Yelena, then there wouldn't be much meaning for thieves to exist. After the sentry posts were set up, everyone was relieved. There was really nothing to worry about. Within a radius of more than 10 miles, they would be able to detect any person or magical beast that sneaked in. Yelena also set up a small magic defense matrix in the center of the camp. This was no longer a camp, but a fortress. However, most of the young people were very active. Although they chose to stay still, they couldn't just wait quietly. There was nothing fun to do here, so they could only use their energy on training. Moreover, Morrison's, who was sweating all day, had set a good example for them. One day, Han Jin sat in his small wooden shed, waiting for everyone to come over for a meeting. To be honest, he didn't like this small wooden shed because everything was done by Sunir. Looking up and down, he saw flowers of different colors everywhere. There was a faint fragrance in the air. Han Jin was puzzled. The weather was gradually turning cold, and there were very few wild flowers in the forest. How did Sunir change the season and make these flowers bloom? In the corner of the shed, there was a pile of earth, which was Han Jin's bed. The bed was covered with thin grass like a blanket, and there were flowers on it. However, it was meaningless to scatter flowers on the bed. Although Han Jin was not fat, he still weighed more than 50 kilograms. One could imagine what the fresh flowers would look like after lying on the bed for a night. When he woke up, he would be exhausted. There were 2 mirrors hanging on the east and west walls. Han Jin had suggested that one mirror should be enough to see if he looked like a human, but Sunir insisted on leaving 2 mirrors. This way, he could look at his front and back. Because of the mirror, Han Jin almost wanted to have a heart-to-heart talk with Sunir. This was because when they were collecting the spoils of war left behind by the giant dragon, Sunir said that her space ring was already full and could not fit anything else. It was only today that Han Jin realized that, including the ones in his shed and Sunir's shed, she still had 4 mirrors. Han Jin was a pragmatist. Was there a need to put the mirrors in the space ring? Wouldn't it be better to make some space? Even the bones of the giant dragon would be fine. Moreover, there was a small spring in the middle of the shed. The spring water was very clear, but the flow of water was not large. After it gathered in Han Jin's shed, it flowed out from under the grass curtain. Sunir had purposely chosen this location for Han Jin's shed because she liked the spring. From Sunir's point of view, this wooden shed was very beautiful, but to Han Jin it was not the same. Obviously, he and Sunir had different opinions in this area. First of all, it was too humid. From the perspective of the 5 elements, a humid environment was not beneficial to one's cultivation. Moreover, he was a man. How could he hide in a flower bed all day long? Unfortunately, Sunir would happily tidy up the wooden shed for him every day. Looking at her busy figure, he could only quietly swallow his words. The grass curtain opened and Sassu, Leger, and the others walked in one by one. After a while, Sunir also came, followed by Morrison's, who was sweating profusely. However, as soon as he entered, he was kicked out by Sunir before he could even say a word. She told him to take a bath first before coming back. The last one to arrive was Yelena, followed by Asa. When she came in, everyone was already seated. There were a few stones beside the spring, and a wooden stool was placed on top of the stones. This was the temporary table. Han Jin and the others sat around the table, leaving only one empty seat. Yelena seemed a little hesitant. Sassu immediately stood up and walked to Leger's side, giving his seat to Yelena. Leger closed his eyes and remained silent. At first, he felt a little wronged, but now he was used to it. Yelena sat down gently, and Asa stood behind her. It wasn't that they didn't care about him, but that there was just enough space for the few of them. "Why did you ask us to come here?" Yelena asked softly. Han Jin pondered for a moment. "How many days have we been waiting?" 7 days, Leger said. He had always had a strong sense of time, so he spoke without hesitation. "I think we can't just wait like this," Han Jin said. Yelena was taken aback. "You were the one who said that we had to wait here. Now, you want to leave?" "No, we still have to wait." Han Jin shook his head. "I mean, we should secretly send a few people back to isolated Cliff City and make some preparations." "Preparations? I'm sure we're well prepared." "Let's put it this way. Look at Morrison's. He doesn't even have a decent soft armor. When the battle starts, what will he rely on to protect himself? Just to protect himself with his fighting power? And Sassu, the only thing he has now is a magic staff." "A magic staff?" Yelena's gaze fell on Sassua's magic staff. Sassua's face turned red, and he quietly hid the magic staff under the stump. What a joke. Han Jin's magic staff was only in comparison. In front of a magus, what could be considered a magic staff? "So I've decided to secretly send people back to isolated Cliff City," Han Jin said slowly. "Last time we got a lot of things. Sassu said that there are many alchemists in isolated Cliff City. We happen to have a lot of raw materials, so we can pay them to make armor for us. With such a big dragon scale, I think each of us can have a set of high-quality magic armor." Han Jin finished speaking, but there was no response. Everyone's expression was a bit strange. Sassu simply covered his forehead with his hand and looked like he was in pain. Sunir was biting her lips, and Yelena had a faint smile on her face. "What's wrong?" Han Jin was stunned. These words were the result of his careful consideration. Of course, he also hid a lot of things. He had to return to isolated Cliff City because he was running out of ammunition and food. The purpose of returning to isolated Cliff City with Sunir and the others was to collect more magic crystals. Although he had succeeded in the art of alchemy and could now absorb the energy of 5th-grade magic crystals. He didn't have many 5th-grade magic crystals. The magic crystals of the Earth Bear and the Tree Demon were all 8th grade. The magic crystals of the Flash Leopard and the Giant Lizard were all 6th grade. The dozens of magic crystals of the Wind Wolf were all 5th grade, but he had used them all up. When he was in the underground city, he robbed a lot of things from the caravan of the Holy Crown City. There were more than 300 6th grade fire magic crystals and more than 60 6th grade water magic crystals, all of which were 6th grade. The energy of a 5th grade magic crystal was about 100 jia, which he could easily absorb. However, the energy of a 6th grade magic crystal was close to 1,000 jia. He didn't dare to mess around. Although he had broken through the realm of Xian, he was still far away from being able to do whatever he wanted. The difference of only 1 grade was enough to make him helpless. Fortunately, he had some common sense. Otherwise, Han Jin would have been forced to find a way to break the magic crystals. You wanted to talk to me about those alchemists just to make magic armor for us? Sasu asked in a strange voice. Yes, what's wrong with that? Ahem. Asa coughed dryly. Sir, the Song of Triumph, our dean, is one of the makers. Really? That's surprising. Han Jin smiled. He could only blame himself for being too sensitive. When he listened to others, he would always consider the motive, subtext, and some other things in the words before the content. Therefore, he subconsciously thought that Asa was bragging about Yelena, so he naturally played along. When he thought about the content, he was stunned. One of the makers? Happy holidays to everyone. I'm a little ashamed. It's already the next day, and I just published the article. I really have no choice. After I woke up, I had to wash up and dress up immediately because I was going to visit someone. National Day and Mid-Autumn Festival were right next to each other, so it could be said that the whole world was celebrating. But for me, it was a bit miserable. I couldn't eat scallions, ginger, garlic, seafood, alcohol, spicy food, and I couldn't even eat eggs. When other people were drinking and exchanging toasts with each other, I could only hold a bowl of porridge at the side, and I even had to put on a smile. In the end, I couldn't hold it in anymore and secretly poured a little beer. As a result, my sister-in-law saw it and yelled, "Do you want to die?" Alcohol and cephalosporin react. Since she was a nurse, I immediately straightened my clothes and sat properly, smiling along with her. Let's not talk about this anymore. Finally, let's talk about the fan system. I personally feel that it's like roasting an author on a fire. When a book is written, without the strong support of the guild master, sect master, elder, hall master, and branch master, it will be very awkward. That day Lil suddenly told me, "Congratulations, there are 2 guild masters." I was ecstatic and opened the webpage as fast as I could. I don't know where my energy came from, but my eyes weren't blurry and my head wasn't hurting. I was very nimble. Then, I saw the 2 guild masters. Their names were very familiar, because they stayed in the conspicuous positions for more time than my advertisement. I was so touched. Let's not talk about anything else. Thank you, Smile, Kitty, Xiaoyu, Bean Bun, Fengyu, Lil, Millionaire, Lijxf, Wuyu, Good Book, 133, Xiaofeng, Xiaoxiao, and other brothers and sisters for their support. Those who didn't mention your name, please don't mind, I'll remember it in my heart. If I write down all my names, I'll exceed the required word count. Finally, I will be strict with myself and recover as soon as possible. I will work hard to repay everyone, I promise. Chapter 179. Sasu shook his head. Raphael, instead of giving the dragon scale to those alchemists, why don't you give it to Yelena? Although the conditions here are very simple, Yelena's enchantment skills are far superior to those of ordinary alchemists. I'm really curious. Why do you trust them? Alchemists can also make junk? Han Jin asked in surprise. Of course, the process of making enchantment equipment is very complicated. Even at the last step, we have to be careful. If there is even the slightest mistake, all our previous efforts will be in vain, Yelena said. If I fail, then what about my dragon scale? Yelena shrugged. Obviously, she didn't think this question needed to be answered. If they had already failed, what else could there be? If I give you the dragon scale, can you make enchantment equipment for them right now? Han Jin asked softly. Yelena's expression became more and more helpless. She looked at Han Jin and finally turned her gaze to the others. Attitude. Pay attention to your attitude. Leger elbowed Han Jin and said in a low voice. If they obtained a very good magic material, the owner would often find someone with enough skill to make enchantment equipment for them. The higher the skill level, the lower the risk of failure. Moreover, their attitude was extremely humble, and they would make all kinds of promises. This was because making enchantment equipment was not an easy task. The whole process was not only difficult but also very dangerous. The maker had to put all his effort into the work. Alchemists relied on this profession to make a living, so they wouldn't refuse and couldn't refuse. However, Yelena didn't care about this little income. Of course, she could help everyone. The key was that Han Jin's attitude was very wrong. He seemed to be ordering Yelena to do something, and there was a kind of expectation in his eyes. Could it be that he was expecting Yelena to give him a guarantee that she wouldn't fail? I don't recommend this, Sassu said. Raphael, you haven't realized how lucky we are. It's like we picked up a giant dragon for free. Will this happen again in the future? After hearing Sassua's words, Morrison's, Sunir, and the others all nodded. This kind of opportunity was indeed hard to come by. They couldn't ignore it just because they had it in their hands. Also, this is too difficult for Yelena. We can't build a magic laboratory here, right? Sassu smiled bitterly. What if it fails? Destroying the dragon scale is a small matter, but what if Yelena is injured? Yes, Raphael, Moxink said in a low, muffled voice. Anyway, the dragon scale is in our hands. No one can take it away from us. Let's talk about it after we settle down. Han Jin hesitated for a moment. Then we have to send someone back too. To do what? Do you want substitute puppets? Do you want to speed up your own cultivation? Han Jin simply said, if you want, then send someone back. I need magic crystals, a large number of magic crystals. Yelena still didn't quite understand, but Leger and the others immediately became excited, as if they had been injected with stimulants. Especially substitute puppets, they knew all too well what it meant. One chance, one life. On the long and difficult road to becoming a master, countless people died prematurely. Some died in humiliation, some died helplessly, and some died inexplicably. If everyone had another life, who knew how many of them would be able to mature? Some of them might even become influential figures that would shock the whole continent. This was definitely not impossible, although the stand-in puppets also had a fatal flaw, which was that they couldn't change the situation in a real crisis. If they were facing an invincible opponent, even if they released 100 stand-in puppets, it would only cost them 100 more moves. However, Leja and the others were content. One chance was enough. Morrison's is too obvious a target. Sassu should stay here. Whether Sunir wears a mask or not, she will attract attention. I think I should go back by myself, Leger said. You think you won't attract attention? Sunir smiled. Me? Why would they notice me? Do you still remember the place where we first met Yelena? Of course. The owner of that restaurant was disturbed countless times. In the end, he couldn't take it anymore and wrote down everything he knew and posted it on the front of the restaurant. Even so, there were still people who sneaked into the restaurant and tried to use violence to pry out secrets that others didn't know. Sunir sighed. Now, our appearances are no longer a secret, especially Morrison's. You grew up in isolated Cliff City, so you were the first to be discovered. Fortunately, we didn't bring Sylvia with us. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened to Sylvia. They know about me. Morrison's pointed at his nose. Yes. Sunir nodded. Gibran knows your name, your past life, and even your teacher. Do you think he's the only one in the big isolated Cliff City who's so meticulous? Did Julia tell you all this? Han Jin asked. Yes. Morrison's face was a bit pale. He used to hope that he could become a famous warrior, but now he knew that fame wasn't always a good thing, especially when a pack of wolves was waiting to bite him. It was a really creepy feeling. They shouldn't know about me, right? Leger frowned. They don't know about your background, but your profession, appearance, temper, and combat ability are no longer a secret. Julia told me that when the Black Mission was first released, some mercenaries tried their best to collect our information and sell it publicly. At first, our information could be sold for more than 100 gold coins. Sunir paused. I can guarantee that any of us will be recognized as soon as we appear in isolated Cliff City. Then what should we do? Leger stuttered. How about this? Let Sister Edwina go back. Sunir said, Sister Edwina is very smart. We can leave everything to her. Han Jin and the others looked at each other, and Sasu nodded. That's a good idea. The people of isolated Cliff City don't know what happened here, so naturally, they won't pay attention to Edwina. If you need it so much. Yelena took out a few magic crystals from her space ring. Anything that she collected was naturally not ordinary. The smallest magic crystal was about the size of a child's fist. It was blue and red in color, and its color was very bright. These magic crystals are for you. Han Jin shook his head helplessly. I don't need these. I can only use 5th grade magic crystals. Must they be 5th grade magic crystals? Yelena asked in surprise. 3rd grade and 4th grade magic crystals are also acceptable. I'll go find Sister Edwina. Sunir stood up and walked to the door. She paused and smiled at Han Jin. The more the better? Of course, the more the better. Han Jin took out a few magic crystals from the Earth Bear and the Dryad from his space ring. After a moment of hesitation, he grabbed the magic crystals that Yelena had taken out. Sunir, give these magic crystals to Edwina. Let her sell them and use the money to buy magic crystals. No need. Sunir shook her head. Wait. Han Jin hurriedly called out when he saw that Sunir had already walked out of the wooden shed. He didn't want to owe anyone anything. Sasu took the magic crystals and chased after Sunir to the door. Seeing that Sunir was already far away, he walked back and put the magic crystals on the wooden stool. With Sunir's status among the elves, it's not a big deal to borrow money from them. Also, didn't you say that you'll need 8th grade magic crystals sooner or later? You should keep these. Yelena's eyes lit up. She felt that she had discovered something important from Sasua's words. Raphael, what do you think we should do about the Red Vanguards? Leger asked softly. What do you mean? Morrison's asked back. Leger saw that everyone was looking at him and waved his hand. Don't misunderstand. I believe in Julia and Edwina, but Gibran. He has a bad reputation. He's cruel and merciless. Now he's worried about Julia, but what if he really goes all out one day? I'm afraid that he'll be a fatal threat to us. Haha, the reputation of a thief. Yelena sneered. Is there a wise magician, a righteous and humble knight, and a respectable thief? Leger pretended not to hear. I think we should find a way to make them leave us, but I'm worried that Sunir will be unhappy. Raphael, what do you think we should do? I think they're decent people, Morrison said. Are you crazy? Leger looked at Morrison's in surprise. Didn't you say that even if we saw the Black Mission, we would still accept it? Morrison's University said casually. Why should we blame them? Leger smiled bitterly. Morrison's, Don't forget that we're the ones being attacked. And in the future, we'll be attacked continuously. How can you speak for others? I'm just speaking for reason. Moxink stood up with his sword on his shoulder. Also, you should have noticed that the elf named Julia has been unhappy all this time. If she really wanted to, she would have driven Gibran away long ago. Is this something we should interfere in? Morrison's is right. Let's observe for a while. Han Jean looked up. Where are you going? I'm going to find Hayden. Hayden. Han Jean felt that the name was familiar, but he couldn't remember it. It's the warrior from the Red Vanguards. Leger still smiled bitterly. Morrison's, he's a 9th-grade swordsman. How can you be his opponent? I think you shouldn't go looking for trouble. Sooner or later. Morrison's paused and said softly, sooner or later. With that, he walked out. There's something wrong with this guy, Sasu said in surprise. Who knows what triggered him? Leger shrugged. I've seen the recipe left by Brother Freak. I'll buy some tomorrow and try it out. Thank you. Also, a friend pointed out a bug. I'll fix it now. Chapter 180. This night was no different from any other night. A gentle breeze blew through the camp, and the smell of early autumn brought a refreshing feeling to the hearts and minds of the people. A few young magicians were on night duty. They sat around the campfire, chatting and laughing in low voices. The faint starlight sprinkled down, making the forest seem more poetic. Everything was normal, except for Chipango. From the beginning to the end, Han Jean had not allowed him to leave, and Chipango was very clear that he had a lot of inside information. Under these circumstances, it was already very kind of Han Jean not to kill him, so he didn't want to be a busybody and just quietly existed. Chipango didn't even dare to build a wooden hut for himself. Who knew if he was considered a prisoner now? He didn't want to attract anyone's attention, so in the end, he found some hay and branches and built a nest for himself in the corner of the camp. To be honest, the nest wasn't much better than a dog kennel, but he was very satisfied. He had food to eat and a place to rest. It was so quiet that Chipango could hear his slightly rapid breathing. His forehead, cheeks, chest, back, and hands were covered in cold sweat. When the night wind blew, he felt a chill all over his body. To be able to survive in this extremely dangerous place until today, the eyesight that his mother had passed on to him had saved him many times. No one in the entire camp could detect any abnormalities, but he could clearly see that a huge monster was quietly approaching. He knew what that monster was, and he even knew who that monster was. 2 years ago, he happened to see an inconspicuous mercenary team almost break out into a conflict with the Dragon Singer mercenary group. At the time, the mercenary team had a lot of people, while the Dragon Singer mercenary group only had 5 people. However, the leader of the Dragon Singer mercenary group, Wyvern Knight Dwight Steele, happened to be there. Logically speaking, they had the absolute advantage. Dwight Steele alone was enough to wipe out the entire mercenary team, not to mention that the people standing beside him were all his close friends who had experienced hundreds of battles. But the result was shocking. When the mercenary team secretly released the monster, Dwight Steele stepped forward to stop his angry friends and negotiated with the mercenary team in an amicable manner. In the end, the disputed spoils were divided equally according to the number of people present. It was important to note that the Dragon Singer mercenary group only had 5 people present. Dividing the spoils equally according to the number of people present was absolutely unfair to Dwight Steele. Chipango found it very strange. With the Dragon Singer mercenary group's strength and Wyvern Knight Dwight Steele's status and identity, there was no need for him to compromise with anyone. Coincidentally, he had some free time at the time, so he secretly started investigating. But after a few days, he voluntarily gave up because he found more and more things that made his hair stand on end. He really didn't dare to continue investigating. The giant creature that could turn invisible looked like a wyvern, but it was many times larger. Chipango had read many ancient books about it, and finally determined that it was the abyssal ghost snake. The abyssal ghost snake was even rarer than a dragon. According to legends, it was the mount of the demon god of the abyss, and it was born with the ability to become invisible. But the most terrifying thing was the third eye on the abyssal ghost snake's forehead, the cursed eye of the demon god. Once the cursed eye of the demon god opened, it could turn a person or any other life form into a stone statue. This was different from the petrification ability of the Medusa nobles. Petrification was a type of magic that could be dispelled or returned to normal as the elements dissipated. But the cursed eye of the demon god had an irreversible elemental annihilation ability. Turning into a stone statue meant complete death. Maybe it was because they had the abyssal ghost snake, or maybe it was to show the origin of their leader, but the name of the mercenary group was the Abyss, and the real reason why the Abyss mercenary team was unknown was that they rarely took on missions. They only wandered around the forest of magic beasts all year round, and occasionally returned to isolated Cliff City. Even when they returned, they only rested for a few days before setting off again. If a mercenary group wanted to make a name for themselves, they could only do so through missions. The more missions they completed, the more difficult they would be, and the more attention they would attract. Naturally, a mercenary group like the Abyss mercenary team would be buried. Were they supposed to follow them everywhere and observe what they did? At this point, Chipango stopped his secret investigation. Someone that even Dwight Steele found difficult to deal with was definitely not someone he could afford to offend. If he was discovered, he would definitely end up in a miserable state. The giant monster was less than 100 meters away from the camp. Chipango's body trembled slightly. He could see two red shadows on the abyssal ghost snake's back. One of them should be the abyssal ghost snake's master, the captain of the Abyss mercenary team, and the mysterious summoner. The other one should be a magician. Since none of the magic sentries had sent out any alarms, it was obvious that the magician had already deciphered them, and that magician should be very powerful, at least in the area of magic sentries. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to decipher a magic sentries set up by a magus. But their movements were so slow. The magic sentries that covered the entire mountain should have caused them some trouble. Unfortunately, it was just trouble. What should I do? Run away? Chipango asked himself. He didn't want to go against the strange and scary mercenaries in the camp, and he definitely didn't want to risk his life for anyone. At this moment, Erwin, who was sitting next to the campfire, stood up and sniffed hard. He faintly smelled something fishy. His recent experience told him that a magical beast was approaching. "Erwin, what's wrong?" a young magician asked. "I'll go take a look over there." Erwin pointed to the side. "Something's not right." The magician shrugged. With the dean here and the defensive magic circle in the camp, he felt like everyone was very safe. "It's all your fault." A female magician giggled. "Erwin must have been scared out of his wits when you told him the story of the necromancer." "My God. Poor Erwin." The other magician also revealed a mocking smile. Erwin ignored the mockery behind him and continued walking forward. He was a very serious person, and he had to get to the bottom of this. Soon, he stood at the fence and quietly observed outside. Under the faint starlight, everything was normal, but the fishy smell seemed to be getting stronger. Erwin chanted a spell in a low voice, and a shining ball of light shot out, instantly illuminating the entire hillside. Erwin's spell alarmed his other companions, and the magicians all rushed over. However, other than the swaying grass, they could see nothing. "Erwin, what's wrong?" the female magician asked with a frown. "I just feel like something's wrong." Erwin scratched his head. He also felt embarrassed. "Do you guys smell something?" "Something?" The female magician sniffed hard and took a step back. Her eyes widened in anger. "You guys, how many days have you not bathed?" I bathed yesterday. A magician argued, but he wasn't confident enough. He secretly sniffed his armpit. Seriously. The female magician waved her hand at the tip of her nose. Forget it, I'm not on night duty with you guys. Hey, don't go. A few magicians shouted in unison. As the saying went, when men and women worked together, work would be less tiring. With a female companion, the night would pass in the blink of an eye, leaving a group of men behind would be somewhat boring. I'm not going to stay here and smell your stench. The female magician rolled her eyes. She gracefully turned around and walked back to her wooden shed. Erwin, it's all your fault. A magician complained helplessly. Our Erwin, you're probably the first magician in history to be frightened by the stench of his own sweat, right? Another magician chuckled. Erwin's face turned red. He sniffed his clothes hard. Sure enough, there was a thick smell of sweat. He hadn't bathed for 3 days. Erwin took a deep breath and said with difficulty, But I feel like the stench is coming from outside. What's outside? It's the Terashaw forest. It's the magic beast forest. The magician obviously didn't want to continue arguing. He said in a lecturing tone, This is the smell of the forest. Erwin, this is not your home, so you have to get used to it. Do you understand? Erwin spread out his hands helplessly. He was convinced by his companions. Maybe it really was his illusion. The next moment, Erwin turned around and was about to return to the bonfire with his companions. Suddenly, an idea came to his mind. He finally understood why he felt that something was wrong. The stench was regular, sometimes thick, sometimes thin, as if something was breathing on him. Something was definitely wrong. Erwin suddenly turned around. The moment he tried to open his eyes wide to see what was going on, his body suddenly stiffened. Even his magic robe and hair froze in place. A gust of wind blew by, and his hair fell off piece by piece, turning into flying dust on the ground. A little bit of crystal gradually disappeared from Erwin's eyes. His eyes and cheeks quickly became rough. The curse needed some time. At least Erwin could feel what was happening to him. He used the last of his strength to loosen his left hand. This was the only thing he could do. In fact, Erwin was a very alert and smart young man who grew up very quickly. He and Asa were highly valued by Yelena, but he lacked enough luck. In this chaotic continent, dying young was not a rare thing, although it was very regrettable. Erwin, a magician shouted angrily. Quiet, don't wake the master, another magician said. But look at him. The magician suddenly stopped mid-sentence because the magic staff in Erwin's left hand fell to the ground and shattered like a stone. Unfortunately, Erwin's last effort did not alert his companions because they had not seen the real enemy yet. A few magicians actually walked toward Erwin's statue, but after taking 2 steps, their bodies stiffened almost at the same time. Chipango had been observing the situation from beginning to end. He suddenly thought of something, and his face instantly twisted. He then jumped up and a series of sharp screams pierced through the quiet sky. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 181. Everyone in the camp was awakened by the shrill scream. One by one, they rushed out of the wooden hut. The first thing Asa and the others did was to cast illumination spells everywhere. 7 or 8 white light balls flew into the sky, illuminating the camp and its surroundings, but they couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. Han Jin happened to see the backs of Erwin and the other young people. He couldn't help but be shocked. Those figures gave him a feeling of death. Everyone else was moving closer to each other, but they just stood there, motionless. Enemy attack! Chipango ran over with a ferocious face. He pointed at a place and said, The abyssal ghost snake. There's an abyssal ghost snake there. Yelena was approaching Han Jin. Her expression changed when she heard this. She had a lot of inexperience, but in terms of knowledge, even the old men in the God's Language Magic Academy couldn't compare to her. She knew what kind of magical beast the abyssal ghost snake was. Yelena raised her wand, and a ball of lightning fell from the sky. It hit the ground and turned into a circle of electric arcs that spread out. Roar! A deafening roar sounded, and an enormous creature suddenly appeared on the seemingly peaceful grassland. It looked similar to a wyvern in appearance, but it was dozens of times larger. Also, the wyvern was grassy green, while the abyssal ghost snake was pitch black, like the deep night sky. There were even fluorescent lights flowing on its surface, like a cluster of bright stars. However, the abyssal ghost snake's proportions were a bit off. Its body was like a duck, and its flapping wings were very short and pitiful. It probably couldn't fly. Its neck was like a snake's, thin and long, and looked very agile. Its head was triangular, and its snout was as sharp as a sword. It gave off an extremely vicious feeling. The abyssal ghost snake didn't have scales. Its whole body was covered with short fur, and the fluorescent lights were emitted by the fur. Morrison's, Leger, and the others all let out a sigh of relief when they saw the abyssal ghost snake's appearance. Although the abyssal ghost snake's neck could stretch up to 12 meters, and its clumsy body was even bigger than the Hydra from the other day, most mercenaries had the ability to recognize and judge magical beasts. It was a basic skill. Speaking of which, it was very simple. What magical beasts like the Gale Wolf, Flash Leopard, Earth Bear, and so on relied on could be seen from their appearance. For example, no one would think that tree demons relied on speed to hunt. Even if one saw a tree demon for the first time, that pair of almost unrecognizable legs was enough to prove many things. All magical beasts had to abide by the rules of survival. After countless years of reproduction, the abilities that magical beasts relied on had long since become traceable. As long as one had a pair of bright eyes, they would be able to guess. The abyssal ghost snake's body was too clumsy. It only had 2 short legs, and its neck was too thin and too long. This meant that the abyssal ghost snake didn't have strong melee abilities. It was more like a magical beast that was more suited for water. In this forest, its threat was greatly reduced. As for magic, they had a magus. Other than a dragon, no other magical beast could suppress a magus in magic. Roar! The abyssal ghost snake roared again. Since its tracks had been exposed, they didn't have anything to worry about. It simply strode forward. However, the abyssal ghost snake swayed as it walked, like a funny drunk man. But Yelena didn't laugh. She raised her wand again, and 12 magic detection rings exploded inside and outside the camp. This kind of magic had become a necessary prelude to her battle. Then she activated the camp's defensive magic circle and yelled with all her might, "Come back! Back off!" Following the abyssal ghost snake's footsteps, the ground shook violently. A few dumbfounded figures near the fence fell down one after another, and in the next moment, their bodies were smashed into pieces. Yelena was stunned, Asa was stunned, and the young magicians were all stunned. Then Asa rushed forward with a roar. Erwin, a few other magicians rushed up with Asa. They were eager to know what had happened to their companions. But at this moment, a flame suddenly lit up in front of them, and then turned into a raging sea of fire. Yelena didn't have the time to chant a spell. She could only cast an ice wall as fast as she could, blocking in front of Asa and the others. With a boom, the sea of fire crashed into the ice wall. It only paused for a moment before the entire ice wall collapsed and turned into countless ice shards. But this little bit of time was enough for Asa and the others to regain their senses. They released magic shields at the same time and desperately retreated. The raging sea of fire swept across a distance of dozens of meters in the blink of an eye, swallowing Asa and the others. The female magicians and deacons who had retreated to the back couldn't help but scream. When the fire dissipated, Asa and the others stumbled out. Asa and the other two magicians were in good condition. Although their magic shields had become very dim, at least they were still protected. The last magician, on the other hand, had turned into a man of fire. He desperately struggled, ran, and screamed. "Come back!" Morrison's roared, and jumped up to help Asa. "Come back!" Yelena's terrified scream was even louder than his, because she knew the abyssal ghost snake's special ability. For a 7th-grade warrior like Morrison's, there was almost no chance of him being immune to the curse. If he was hit, he would die. "Master, that abyssal ghost snake has already cast 4 curses, and it's still underage." Chipango roared as if he was reporting his achievement. One figure after another appeared on the hillside, and quickly rushed over along the path that the abyssal ghost snake had opened for them. A few thieves suddenly appeared outside the camp. Yelena's magic detection halo hadn't disappeared yet, and they just happened to bump into it. But they were very unscrupulous, and just swaggered into the camp with daggers in their hands. Yelena took a deep breath, and forcefully swung her magic staff forward. A ball of lightning shot out and hit the body of the abyssal ghost snake with lightning speed. It immediately turned into countless arcs of lightning that flowed in all directions, and finally formed a huge net that firmly trapped the abyssal ghost snake and the 2 people on it. The people on the abyssal ghost snake faintly let out a cry of surprise, and then forcibly opened a magic shield. But the magic shield's effect was only to spread the net a little, and it couldn't destroy it. "Raphael!" Yelena yelled in a low voice, and then concentrated on chanting a spell. Han Jin raised his hand and threw out 3 talismans, and 3 wooden golems appeared out of thin air to protect Yelena. He didn't rush into the battle, and just stood there quietly observing the situation. On one hand, he knew that Yelena was very weak when casting powerful spells, and on the other hand, he didn't have time to make a new flying sword. Instead of killing them one by one, it was better to protect Yelena first. A green light flashed, and the thieves who had jumped into the camp were tightly bound by green vines that suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The arrogance on their faces instantly disappeared, and they were all shocked. "How is this possible?" "It's the Trent's arrow." Sunir's figure appeared next to a wooden shed. She drew her bow and aimed at the thieves. Although she wasn't as strong as Edwina, shooting targets was no doubt very easy. Plus, they were just thieves who couldn't move. Every arrow she shot caused a rain of blood to splatter. The mercenaries were getting closer and closer. Although the abyssal ghost snake had been trapped by the net, and the thieves in front of it had been killed one by one, they still looked very relaxed, as if victory was already in their hands. Some of them even had smiles on their faces. "Hurry up and run." Suddenly, a lazy voice came from the flickering electric net. The mercenaries were all dumbfounded, and they all turned to look at the abyssal ghost snake, which they could only make out the outline of. With a loud bang, a 10-meter-long dragon made up entirely of flames appeared, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws as it pounced on the electric net. "What are you waiting for? If you don't want to be killed by the 9 lightning call, this is your last chance," the lazy voice continued. The mercenaries scrambled to turn around and run down the hill with all their might. It was a stark contrast to their previous fearlessness. Obviously, they hadn't been so relaxed just now because they were confident in themselves. The flying fire dragon tore at the net with all its might, and the net's light dimmed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Unfortunately, Yelena's spell was about to be completed. "You're in luck, and this magister isn't as stupid as people say," the lazy voice sighed. "But it doesn't change anything." Yelena didn't want to bicker with anyone. 10,000 words weren't as powerful as a spell. She slowly raised her wand, and the sky suddenly lit up. Streaks of lightning poured down like giant pillars, smashing into the ground and the grass. Deafening explosions sounded one after another, and broken branches and dirt flew everywhere. The place had turned into a world of lightning. All they could see was flashing lightning, and all they could hear was roaring thunder. It was different from another powerful lightning spell, chain lightning. Chain lightning could unleash all of its power in an instant, but 9-grid thunder call required a certain amount of time to cast. As Yelena's magic staff slowly fell down, the flashing lightning finally subsided. What was even more shocking was that there was nothing left except for the devastation that filled their eyes. The giant abyssal ghost snake and the 2 people on its back had all disappeared without a trace. Yelena gritted her teeth and released a dozen magic detection rings. Gibran, who was running over, happened to be affected by the rings and revealed himself. He hurriedly stood there and raised his hands to show that he didn't mean any harm. What's wrong? What happened here? Day after day, I'm so dizzy. I really want to write a few thousand more words in one go and update in 2 days. That way, I can adjust my schedule, but the more I rush, the harder it is to write. I'm going crazy. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.